Jaron Jarvis Channel, Top 20 Scary Stories of the Day from Reddit nosleep. 2018-08-26. Story 1, when you're traveling on the Whistler's Highway, do not get out of the vehicle you're in. Come on, you're not serious. What? I am. It's clearly the fastest way to get to our campsite. But, have you heard of the stories? The deaths, the thing that lives there? Just stories. I have a friend who uses it every single week for his deliveries, and I just talked to him yesterday. But I switched off the walkie-talkie. There they go again. I sighed to Gabby, who was next to me. You can't blame them. Trust me, Brian's just thick-headed. Anything anyone says, he dismisses. Only thing he trusts are his own thoughts. Maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's a bad thing. I just find it irritating. Gabby replied, gripping the wheel harder and glaring at the vehicle in front of her. Do you need me to switch it back on? I asked. No, I think that hearing plain silence is a million times better than hearing their incessant arguing. But don't you think? Relax, we'll switch it on later. After all, we don't want the lead car to bring us to some deserted area rather than the campsite we're supposed to go to, right? Gabby turned her head to look at me briefly and said, right. I replied, and leaned back on the leather seat of the car, and looked behind at the back seat. As usual, our camping bags, with all our supplies, still sat on the back seat. Stop doing that. You're making me think someone's sitting behind us. Gabby complained. Sorry, lady. I muttered, and turned my head to look in front again. Just a few more hours, and we would reach the campsite where we would camp for the next few days. Brian said he was going to catch a deer. He's probably going to come back with some nuts and berries again, and Gabby would rage at him, and he probably won't listen to her again. Ah well, might as well catch some sleep, I thought, as my eyelids drooped down, and I nodded off to complete silence. Wake up, sleepyhead. Gabby's voice pierced through my dream, and I sat up, still half asleep, realizing that we had stopped. Through heavy eyelids, I could see Gabby, along with Brian and Becky, standing in front of some sign on the road. Groaning, I opened the car door, and stepped out of the car. What's going on? I muttered sleepily. Brian rolled his eyes, and remarked, did you forget? Before you enter the Whistler's Highway, you must sign the agreement. Stepping forward and looking closely at the sign, I remembered. Oh right. I said hastily as I took out my marker and signed on the surface of the sign. The sign wasn't the prettiest thing I saw on the highway. Danger. You're entering the Whistler's Highway. By signing on this sign, you agree to the rules of the highway. Don't travel on the highway at night, otherwise the Whistler will get you. Don't travel alone, otherwise the Whistler will get you. Don't, absolutely don't, get out of your vehicle while on the highway, otherwise the Whistler will definitely get you. Were emblazoned in red on the sign, with a space at the bottom, where numerous signatures, including mine, Becky's, Gabby's and Brian's signatures, were marked on the surface, with some crossed out for no particular reason. The entire sign looked like it was about to fall off as it very carefully balanced on the post holding it up. Boy, this Whistler guy seems like a fun guy to meet. Half of me thought to myself, while the other half still felt a bit unsettled by the get you part. Becky also seemed to share my thoughts, as she stared upwards worriedly at the sky, which was visibly turning darker. Are you sure we're safe when we go on this highway? I mean, it's almost nighttime, and the sign clearly said. She stammered, don't worry. The Whistler is just an urban legend, and I doubt he would be mad if we broke one of his precious rules. Brian interrupted confidently. Looking at the three people around him, he remarked, now come on. Let's get a move on. I don't intend to sleep in the car. He had already opened the car door, and was now waiting for us in the car. The three of us sighed, and moved towards our respective cars. The cars started up, and began to trundle down the Whistler's Highway. Looking at the empty desert along the highway, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had made a mistake, and that we were in grave danger. Still feeling scared, I tilted my head and looked up at the sky. It was indeed getting dark. After staring at the desert and the sky for about an hour or so, I began to notice something strange. Notably, the dark black sky had turned purple. Now, I didn't know much about weather and sky colors and all that, but I knew that the sky shouldn't be purple at what was close to 9 p.m., as my watch helpfully indicated. I tried to mention this to Gabby, but she looked noticeably distracted, and her foot was continuously pushing down on the gas pedal. It was then that I realized something else. The car was slowing down. Looking at the car in front of us, I saw that it was also slowing down. Fuck. I heard Gabby shout as she exerted all her strength into pushing the gas pedal, hoping that the car would suddenly go faster. But it was no use. Both of the cars eventually stopped after a few minutes. The engine wasn't dead, and the car was still running, but it wasn't moving well, Gabby said, throwing her arms up in defeat and turning to look at me. Someone's gotta go out there and fix this damn car. Looking at her eyes, I knew that she meant me. I sighed, and prepared to open the car door. Wait. Becky's shrill voice pierced through the walkie-talkie. What? Gabby shouted in response, covering her ears as though she expected more loud noises. Remember the third rule. No getting out of the car while on the highway. For God's sake, Becky, you seriously bought into that sign? It looked like it was erected about 1,000,000 years ago. Brian's angry shout echoed in the car. But the Whistler nothing. It's just a stupid bogeyman story created to scare the kids into saying nothing during road trips. There's nothing dangerous about stepping outside. Having had enough, I shot back a reply into the walkie-talkie. You know what, Brian? I'm going to listen to Becky, and I'm going to stay inside the car. You can go outside and get your annoying ass eaten by the Whistler or whatever he is called. Next to me, Gabby opened her mouth seemingly to protest, but she didn't say anything. All right, fine. But don't blame me if nothing happens, and we end up wasting our time. Brian replied angrily. A few minutes of silence passed. All right, guys, to pass the time, let's play some car games. Silence. All right, fine. What do you want to play first? Let's play, I Spy. I spy something with my little eye beginning with the letter D. Groaning, I replied, desert. You're spying a desert. Correct. Now Jordan, it's your turn. Sighing, I looked out the window, hoping to find something I could spy. That was when I saw it. Far off in the distance, something was standing in the desert. I couldn't quite make out its features, but I knew for a fact that it was way taller than an actual human. It had a black top hat on, and it was wearing some kind of red suit. I couldn't see its eyes, but I knew that it was looking in our direction. I could vaguely hear some kind of whistling noise coming from that thing. That whistling creature. The Whistler. What do you think it wants? Becky's frightened voice came out of the receiver. I don't know. Maybe it's an illusion? Brian's voice came out, also trembling. I couldn't say anything. I was just staring at the thing, transfixed. Okay, now we definitely should not get out of the car. Becky said. Okay. Me, Gabby and Brian said in unison. As if that was not obvious. We all sat in our cars, staring at the Whistler. It was whistling a tune. I couldn't quite make out much of the tune, but I knew I had heard it before, either on the street or in a movie. But the whistling sounded unnatural. Hearing it sent chills down my spine, and made me even more scared. The Whistler didn't seem to move. It just stood in the same spot, whistling. It was waiting for us to get out of the car. Anxious, I began repeatedly checking the car lock, confirming that it was indeed locked before I looked at Gabby. She looked paler than usual, and she didn't say anything. Well, anything to me at least. As I leaned in close, hoping to comfort her, I heard her mutter something under her breath. I need to get out. Need to get out. Need to get out. Need to get out. Of the car. Of the car. I was genuinely freaked out then, and I shook her violently, hoping to snap her out of her chanting. She screamed and freaked out as soon as I shook her before she looked at me. Did I say anything? She said in a small voice. The four of us seemed to be even more on edge after I told Brian and Becky about Gabby's episode. We were scared to go to sleep, as we knew that if we did, we could risk ending up like Gabby. Gabby became incredibly frightened after I told her what she said, and she clutched my hand tightly. I clutched hers back equally tightly, and all of us just sat in silence for a few minutes. Eventually, I heard Gabby whisper, "I'm hungry." I nodded to acknowledge this, and reached behind to grab the bag of supplies in the back seat. But they weren't in the back seat. I looked around frantically for the bag, until I eventually saw it. For some unknown reason, it was on the road. Outside the car. I rolled down the windows, and tried to reach for it, but it was too far away. The only way to get it was to get out of the car. This was its plan. It wanted to get us out of the car, so that it could do something to us. I rolled up the windows, and glared at it. It seemed to notice that I wasn't going to get out of the car, because the whistling seemed to get louder. It was now very audible, and my ears began to ring from it. Despite this, I refused to get out of the car. After a few minutes, the whistling grew quieter again, and we sat in silence again. Gabby's stomach was growling now, but judging from her face, I knew that she also didn't want to leave to get the bag. We sat in the car, while the walkie-talkie fell silent as well. It was playing a game with us, and we didn't know when it would end. Eventually, my eyelids began to droop again. Shit, not now. Must stay awake, I thought, but it was no use. I eventually drifted off to sleep again. Jordan. It's over. The thing's gone. Brian's excited voice forced my eyelids to open. I looked around. Indeed, the whistler was gone. We had arrived at the campsite. The bright rays from the sun shone into the car, forcing me to cover my eyes. I breathed a sigh of relief. That thing was finally gone. Come on, Jordan, get your lazy ass out of the car. Brian was standing outside the car, and was next to a pitched-up tent. You need to help us set up the camp. Next to him, Gabby and Becky were standing with sticks in their hands. Come on, Jordan, they remarked, smiling. All right, I'm coming, I replied, as my hand gripped the car door handle. As I prepared to open the car door and step outside the car, suddenly, a sharp pain erupted in the back of my head. As I reeled from the pain, I turned around to see who had hit me. Please, don't scare me like that. Gabby's frightened face whispered next to me. I was confused. Gabby was outside. Unless. I looked outside again. The campsite was gone. We were back in the desert again. The sky still had the strange purple hue to it. And that thing was still there. The whistling grew louder again. The whistler was clearly getting more frustrated now. I was even more scared now. I checked to make sure the door was locked again. Thank you. I turned to Gabby and whispered. She didn't reply, but she nodded in acknowledgement. We sat in silence again, as the whistling grew softer again. After a few minutes of silence, the car suddenly echoed with Becky's screams. Get them off me. Get them off me. Help me. I hurriedly picked up the walkie-talkie, and said, Hello? Brian? Becky? Can you hear me? It's all a dream. Don't panic. No response. The screams continued. This time, I could also faintly hear crying coming from the receiver. It sounded as though Becky was in a lot of pain, and desperately needed our help. But we couldn't do anything. We could only helplessly hear whatever pain Becky was going through. After a few minutes of screaming, it finally stopped. To our relief, the car doors on the car in front hadn't opened during the entire ordeal, so we heaved a sigh of relief. We knew that Becky had managed to overcome the nightmare she had, and didn't think of getting out of the car. The whistling grew way louder now, as the whistler began to walk closer to us. It looked taller now, and its arms and legs grew more elongated. It was clearly mad now. I looked around the car, and looked at the car in front. All of us knew its tricks now. We weren't going to get tricked by. I paused, as I remembered Brian. He hadn't been tricked by it yet. And he was the easiest person to trick, since he didn't trust anyone other than himself. Almost on cue, Brian's voice came through the walkie-talkie. "Guys, the monster's gone. The coast is clear. Woohoo!" Looking at the Whistler, who was coming closer, I frantically shouted, "No! It's a trick. Don't believe it." "What are you talking about? What trick?" "The monster, it's still out there." "Jordan, you must be imagining things. I don't see anything." "No, it's still there. Listen, when I say it's not there, it's not there. To prove it, I'm going to step outside and show you." "No, don't." But it was too late. The car door on the car in front opened, and we watched as Brian's face emerged from the car. It was over in an instant. As soon as Brian's foot stepped on the concrete road, the Whistler stopped whistling, and lunged towards him at shockingly fast speed. As it reached him, I saw his expression change from one that was joyful and happy to one of pure terror. And then he was gone, along with it. The sky lightened, and the bright rays of the sun shone down upon us once more. We didn't say anything, even as the cars started to move down the highway again. We looked at each other, and we knew one thing. The Whistler was real, and it had gotten Brian. A few weeks has passed since Brian's disappearance. As of today, the police are still unable to find his body anywhere, even after interviewing us, since we were the last ones seen with him. All we said was that he disappeared during our camping trip, and we haven't seen him since. We didn't say anything about the Whistler, because we knew that they didn't think the Whistler was real, and we didn't want to seem crazy. Sometimes, I'd like to think we all went crazy during the trip, and that there was no such thing as a Whistler, and that we just imagined the whole thing. But, I don't think that that's the case. Because when I go down to the Whistler Highway entrance sign to place my flowers as a way to remember Brian, I can still see his signature on the sign. Crossed out. Story 2, Hungry. Hunger. Remember the images from Ethiopia with the kids covered in flies with bellies swollen and withered bodies. The liberated survivors of Belsen concentration camp, nothing but walking skeletons. Hunger. You will no doubt have said at some time this week "I'm hungry," or the more dramatic "I'm starving." Unless you are a fat bastard like me that just snacks constantly, so I don't really know what it's like to be truly hungry. But yeah, keep that thought in mind. Hunger. What is the longest you have gone without food? For me it was when I had an operation and couldn't eat for 12 hours beforehand. I think I actually cheated a bit, but what is your longest? A day? See, we are lucky in the West. I have a cupboard full of food. 18 kilograms of pasta in one cupboard alone. Fridge and freezer full. I like food. I like food for numerous reasons. Hunger. Imagine if you wake up in the morning, and you have no food. Imagine it approaches dinner time and you have nothing still. Then the evening meal time passes and still no food. Going to bed having not eaten a thing. The grumbling of your stomach keeping you awake to the point you clench your fist and press it into your gut just to stop it hurting. Then you wake up the next day and nothing. Again. No food. Hunger. How many days could you stand it? Before long all you can think of is food and how to get it. It's amazing how a person will devolve to the level of animal when they are truly hungry. With this knowledge I control. With this knowledge I condition. With this knowledge I break them. Hunger. Whilst they starve down there, I sit up here and eat. Steak with vegetables and peppercorn sauce, tagliatelle with a chicken Alfredo sauce, lamb shoulder with creamy mashed potatoes, curried beef cooked slowly for 6 hours in my slow cooker. I love cooking. And whilst I cook, I open the door to the cellar so that they can smell what I'm cooking. I smile as I go for a bath, smelling the delicious meat cooking, knowing if I can smell it up here they can smell it down there. I usually eat my meals in front of the television. The plate on my knee. I have no wife or partner, no kids, so meals are pretty lonely to be honest. So sometimes I'll carry my plate carefully down the cellar steps. I'll sit at the old wooden table down there and I'll enjoy the company. Granted, this experience is more enjoyable for me than it is for them. They remind me of dogs. Looking pleadingly with big puppy dog eyes. Each of them have wasted away a lot now. 3 days of no food and drink and the pounds just drop off. I sometimes laugh to myself and wish someone would chain me up like that. God knows I could do to lose a few pounds. They stare and watch me eat. It annoys me to be honest, and I stare back until they lower their eyes. I swear the blonde one is trying ESP to send some sort of psychic message to beg me to share. But I don't think that 3 days is long enough. They aren't there yet. Not truly hungry yet. I think at least 2 more days. The one with very dark hair and dark eyes that spat at me in anger when she first woke up here. The one that cursed my mother and called her a bitch. My mother was a fucking saint. For that level of disrespect, she is going to go the full week at least. Even if she breaks at day 5, she will do 2 more. And when they break, I'm not such a jerk as to not provide the food. They will be brought up one at a time. I don't need to worry about them running at this point. They will do whatever I say. On that night I'll cook for them like I cook for myself. Biscuits and gravy, pasta, cake, all the food you can imagine. And I'll sit watching them devour it as though a starving stray dog that had found a discarded bucket of KFC. I bring the blonde one up, feed her and then take her back down. Then the guy with glasses. Again he eats and then back down into the cellar. But when I finally bring the dark-haired one up, she still has that look in her eyes that says fuck you. I take my .45 out and put it on the table. I'll bury you out back and nobody will ever find you, I tell her matter-of-factly. I take the food from in front of her and eat it myself. She still has that defiant look. Some animals you just can't break. I take her out back. I have no neighbors for miles. Sometimes I just think I'm starved of genuine human interaction. I could always relate to one of my all-time heroes, Jeffrey Dahmer. He was very misunderstood. He didn't enjoy killing any more than I enjoyed putting the bullet in the back of dark-haired girl's head. Or any of the others that are out back. Jeffrey Dahmer was just lonely. And so am I. I've worked my way through 15 potential partners now. None of them ever meet my criteria. There's always an escape attempt, talking back, arguing. All I want is someone that will genuinely care enough to fully submit. I'm down to 2 potentials now. And to be honest, I'm feeling jaded. I am not even feeling the 2 that are down there. I'll have to post another profile all over the internet, and see which hungry creatures come to my honeypot. I'm just hungry for love. Story 3, I found out the truth about the love letter challenge. A guy friend of mine is in a small group of semi-professional vloggers. By that I mean that him and his buddies like to run around with cameras and act like they are cool. I won't bother promoting his channel since half the time it's boring stuff that a 2-year-old could come up with. The only reason I even subscribe is because he's kind of cute. Andy, their de facto leader, found out about some kind of internet challenge recently and invited me to take part. Here's the message he sent me. Hey @Catherine_the_Kate. Thanks for being such an awesome fan of our channel. We're gearing up to participate in a social experiment that's sweeping the web right now. Our boy Foxy13818 found it while checking out a paranormal forum on it's super easy to do and even easier to get addicted. It's called the Love Letter Challenge, and enclosed in this message are a set of instructions to follow if you choose to participate. Please reply to this message within the next 48 hours to let us know that you're on board. Don't be a chicken. Time's a tickin'. At the bottom of the message was an attachment PDF file, as promised, with a detailed explanation of this challenge. The Love Letter Challenge. Open up a phone book and go to a random page in the white pages. Find a name that includes an address and write it down. Write an anonymous love letter to the person at that address. Make it as detailed and sappy as you want it to be, and only include a return address at the bottom of the letter. Send the letter off and wait for a response. If you get one, you'll need to upload a video of yourself reading it to the web. Then you've successfully completed the challenge and good things will happen to you. Warning, do not attempt this if you are already in a stable relationship with anyone or are planning to become involved in a relationship sometime in the future. It has been shown to create lasting attachments between strangers and ruin existing relationships. Honestly, the whole thing sounded rather silly to me, especially since Sandy claimed to find it on some sort of supernatural chat room. My initial response was curt but probably more polite than it should have been. Kate, I appreciate the offer, but I'm going to be a little busy over the next few weeks preparing for semi-finals. BTW, where exactly did you find this at anyway? Doesn't sound very spooky to me. I really thought that would be the end of it, but Jojo, the group's funny man, sent me a reply back. Jojo, sorry to hear that, Kate. And sure, I can send you the link. I hope it doesn't keep you up at night, and if it does, I would love to keep you safe. Smile. Cue jazzy music. The site he linked me to wasn't exactly what you would call active. It looked like one of those self-built web pages that only had like 20 members that used the forum at all. There was an entire page dedicated to the love letter challenge, with a few supposedly true accounts of people that finished the ritual. Nothing beyond earlier this year, but I checked the archives. Here's a post that caught my attention. So a few weeks ago I decided to try the love letter challenge. For those of you who don't know, it involves sending an anonymous love letter to a random address that needs to be acquired via the white pages in a phone book. If you get a response, you're to record a video of you reading it out loud, and then post it to the web. Supposedly, good things are supposed to happen to you soon after. Anyway, like I said, a few weeks ago I sent out my letter. Seeing as I didn't want some random person to potentially visit me at my home, I included my work address rather than my own, and I used an old phone book from a state which I no longer live in. Until yesterday, I hadn't gotten a response, and honestly, I began to forget about the whole challenge completely. But when I was checking my mailbox last evening, I saw something that made my stomach curl. Inside my mailbox was an envelope that was completely bare other than the words, "My love," written in block letters through the middle. No stamp. I dropped the rest of my mail and allowed myself to fall to the ground with it. I vaguely felt the pain of my ass smacking against the hard concrete, but I tossed it away with the same neglect as my junk mail into the street. Ripping the envelope open, I found a piece of disheveled notebook paper written in black Sharpie that bled across the page in a way that made it difficult to read. Was this message? Dear Susan, words cannot describe how happy I was to receive your letter in the mail. I blushed as you admitted your love for me, and I've since read it 100 times over, memorizing every detail of your tantalizing words and penmanship, right down to the heart you dot your eyes with. Susan, I watched you sleep last night, and I can almost guarantee that I'll be watching you as you read this letter. Don't be alarmed, Susan. I love you. I love everything about you. Your blue eyes, your long blonde hair, and the intricacies of your mannerisms, like the way you curl your body into a ball and stir around as you struggle to fall asleep. Susan, I think you'd sleep easier if you were cuddled with me at night and every night. I won't force anything upon you, my love. If you'd like to give me a chance, meet me at the coffee shop next to your office after you're done with work tomorrow. I love you. I know it sounds strange, but, well, I just can't believe someone would say such nice things about me. And the fact that he was watching me for so long and had every opportunity to hurt me, but never did, shows that he isn't a bad guy. It's my choice whether I want to give him a chance or not, and we're meeting in public after all. I think I'm going to meet him. While the user in question was previously one of the most active members on the site, posting and commenting nearly every day, in the months that have passed since the thread was posted, she has not logged back into the site. I knew, or rather, I assumed, that Susan had met a grisly end. The letter she posted was so intensely creepy. No, it was downright terrifying. It was made up entirely of red flags indicating that she was being stalked by a lunatic, and her response had been to willingly go and meet with him. This is a hoax of some sort, I told myself. Jojo was just trying to scare me, and as much as I hated to admit it, he was succeeding. I closed out of the window and turned my computer off. Since I wouldn't be participating in it, I decided to put the love letter challenge out of my mind. I had nearly forgotten about it when the letter appeared in my mailbox. It was cream-colored, made of smooth, heavy paper. Unlike the bills and junk mail in my mailbox, it wasn't addressed. Instead, the words "my love" were printed in big block letters across the front. I nearly screamed when I saw it. Memories of the unease and fear I'd felt when reading about Susan's experience with the bizarre ritual flooded my mind. I looked around, scanning the street, searching for anything out of the ordinary. I saw my teenage neighbor walking his dog on the other side of the street, his eyes glued to the Pokemon game on his phone while the dog tugged at the leash. I took the letter inside and, with shaking hands, opened it. My darling Kate. My love. My darling, my dearest, my most treasured one. How I love you so. Your letter brought such joy to my heart. It confirmed my deep-seated belief that you do indeed love me. You know, I never doubted your love. Others told me that you don't even know who I am, but your letter has proved them wrong. My precious, my eternal companion, I'll see you tonight. I tremble with anticipation at our evening rendezvous. I count the seconds until I can hold you in my arms and never let you go. Farewell, my dearest. I love you so. The letter horrified me. What was this shit? It hardly made any sense. What followed next is all a blur, but I will try to recount as best as possible the experience. I looked out the window at the street, my eyes following my neighbor as he and the dog ran down the sidewalk on their imaginary monster hunt. Looking down at the letter, my vision blurred momentarily and I noticed the paper felt sticky under my fingers. Sticky? Blinking quickly and stumbling back, I felt arms around me, catching me as I began to fall. I felt a whisper against my ear and neck as the world went black. Don't worry darling, that's just the chloroform. I've got you now, you're safe. My eyes were gritty and dry and I felt a headache coming on. What's going on? The words seemed so loud. My senses became sluggish and the next thing I realized is I was lying down and my eyes were covered. I froze when I heard his voice. Just relax. Everyone gets nervous when they meet their true love. The man's voice was low, soft, and soothing until he began to chuckle. Next time, the dose will be perfect. I felt him lean down until his breath brushed my cheek. Don't worry my dear. Next time everything will be perfect. He started to laugh again and I recoiled as he licked the side of my face. I tried to pull my hands up but they were caught in something. Panic started to rise, but the next yank pulled one hand free. Ripping the blindfold from my face, I saw my bedroom door close. Over my ragged breathing, I heard him cheerily yell goodbye as the front door slammed. Pushing myself into a sitting position, I looked around at my bedroom. Every flat surface was covered with candles and there were black satin sheets on my bed. The side of my face felt hot and I realized I'd been rubbing it with the blindfold where he had touched me. The blindfold was a black silk necktie. I flung it away in disgust. Shakily, I moved toward the headboard to free my right hand. It wasn't knot-tied, just caught in a loop made with another black tie. Rubbing my sore wrist, I heard my cell phone buzzing. I slowly tried stand, but wound up on my knees next to the bed. My phone. It must have fallen under the edge of the bed. Jojo. Hello? Kate. Oh thank God. I've been calling and calling. We're on the way to your house now. What? What's going on? Jojo. He cut me off just as I started to cry. I hadn't heard from you in a couple days. No one knew where you were. We've been getting some weird replies to our challenge and... The challenge. He was here. He was in my house. I was ugly crying and couldn't catch my breath. Hold on, we're here. I heard the front door open and someone yelling my name. Kate. Kate, where are you? The door to my room opened and Jojo appeared in the doorway, Andy and Fox behind him. Jojo helped me up and walked me toward the door. Come on, let's get you out of here. Sitting in my living room, I told them what little I remembered about the last 3 days. 3 days? How the hell did I lose 3 days? What did you guys do? Who did you give my name to? Nobody. You said you didn't want to do it. Fox handed me a glass of water. Besides, this has gone way past anything. It was supposed to be a prank. Andy rubbed his face with his hands. As he paced the room, he told us about how he had tried to set this up so he could film my reaction. I was just gonna scare you a little. As a joke. I found this guy. His voice trailed off. Fox's voice was quiet and hard. I can't believe you do this. Is this what you had in mind? He gestures around the room and at me. Look at her. My living room and kitchen were covered with candles and rose petals were scattered all over the floor. Is any of this yours? No. I'm wearing the same clothes, but the candles, flowers and sheets aren't mine. I was no longer crying, but still feeling sick and numb. I wanted to throw up. I'm not feeling well. I just want to get out of here. Please take me to the hospital. The guys went from room to room, locking doors and windows and blowing out candles. Andy brought me my shoes and knelt down in front of me. I'm really sorry, Kate. I brushed his hands away and leaned over to tie my sneakers when I hear Fox behind me. What the hell is that? I jumped up and shoved him away as he started pushing up the back of my shirt. Fox's face went white and the others were wide-eyed and scared. There's something written on your back. I tugged my shirt down and felt uncomfortable as they all stared at me. Well, what does it say? I asked them frantically. It's weird. It says, I'm sorry, what the hell? Fox blubbered as he glared at Andy. Just get out of here. All of you. I yelled, pushing Fox away as he tried to comfort me. As far as I was concerned, this was all their fault. This is what Mom warned me about when I came here for college. A strange place with strange people, dangers at every turn. Maybe I should have just stayed closer to home. But I've never been a coward. I knew that I wouldn't just take this sitting down. I called the police to report a break-in at my one-bedroom apartment, and an hour later they were there scrounging for clues. They took pictures of the entire room and had me checked to be sure I wasn't sexually assaulted. Whoever had been there had been careful, wearing gloves and not leaving a trace save where they had written on my back. One of the detectives confirmed it was blood, but it didn't match anything in their database. I must have scrubbed in the shower for 30 minutes after they left to try and get it off. But even when the blood was gone, the feeling of unease still remained. As I stepped out of the shower, I checked my smartphone and noticed I had several messages from Fox urging me to get online. Kate, go to the YouTube channel. I finished drying my hair and sat down at my computer, trying to calm my nerves. But it didn't last for long. As the channel uploaded, I saw an anonymous user had linked a video to the private server, a place where only me and the guys could see. I clicked on it and found myself staring at my own unconscious body. Then a voice that was garbled spoke in narration. Challenger 1319, reporting in. Confirming trophy. Awaiting further instructions. Then the video went black. I quickly messaged Fox for some kind of explanation. What is this? Where did the server link that video to? Cat, you don't get it, do you? That video went everywhere. To every forum the love letter challenge is on. What does that mean? I'd yet. But I think you should probably stay somewhere else until we get this resolved. I sat there at my desk for what felt like hours, shaking as thoughts of terror ran through my mind. I didn't want to be alone. But I didn't want to talk to Fox anymore, because undoubtedly, whether willingly and knowingly or not, he had something to do with what was going on. If the challenge was some sort of hoax to find victims or trophies for the real challenge, how was someone coming after me when I hadn't even participated in the challenge in the first place? It had to be one, or all of, the guys. I couldn't trust them anymore. I couldn't trust anyone. And what did the challenger want anyway? He had me unconscious in front of him, but he recorded a video and asked for further instructions. He said he had me, yet he let me go. Was he gonna come back? I decided not to risk it. Within 5 minutes of the realization I'd packed my laptop and enough of my belongings to stay in a hotel room for a week. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just hopped into my car and started driving to a hotel about 30 minutes away from my home. On the way there, I called my principal to tell him that, due to a family emergency, I was going to be out of town for the next few days. When I reached the hotel, I checked into the cheapest room they had, $37 a night. Surprisingly, I was actually feeling a lot better as I walked into the room. No one knew where I was. I had space from the world, I had safety. But when I glanced at the TV and saw the cream-colored envelope taped to the screen, all my feelings of protection disappeared. I held in a scream, and in a dreamlike state walked towards the TV and grabbed the envelope. As I opened it, I had the vague feeling that I was being watched, but I knew at that moment that I had to read it. I had to see what Challenger 1319 had to say, because it was clear there was nothing I could do to escape them. The smooth paper felt as heavy as bricks as I held it in my hands, but the message was something I wasn't expecting. Kate, I'm not one of the challengers, but I know what's going on. If you want to survive, you'll listen to me unconditionally. Leave this hotel without checking out. Don't worry about the money, I'll handle it. Check into across the street. When you've gotten into your room and settled in, go downstairs and say to the clerk these exact words: would you please allow me to do a load of laundry in the back? My cat has gone missing. Without waiting for a response, you'll go back into your room and lock the door. I'll be in contact with you shortly. I took a few deep breaths, then picked up my backpack and left the room. After wandering around the motel for a few minutes, I found a rear exit. I ducked out into a garbage-filled alleyway. After getting my bearings, I walked to the motel across the street. The lobby was badly lit and grimy. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead and a potted plant wilted in the corner. The clerk was seated at a desk tucked into an alcove behind a protective plexiglass screen. I approached him hesitantly. He was chomping on a cigar and flipping lazily through a dirty magazine, making no effort to hide its contents. What you want? He asked, not bothering to look up. I need a room. How long? I shifted nervously. I need it for the night. He turned away from the magazine, towards a row of keys attached to big plastic tags on the wall behind him. He grabbed one at random and slid it through a slot at the bottom of the plexiglass. $50, he said, room 218. My throat felt dry and sandpapery, but I spoke anyway, trying to keep my voice steady. Would you please allow me to do a load of laundry in the back? My cat has gone missing. The man's bowed head snapped up, his eyes blazing bright with sudden focus. He snatched the key back and returned it to the wall of keys. He grabbed a key with a cracked pink tag. He slid it over to me. Room 104, he said, keep your money. I nodded and took the key. I walked down the corridor leading into the motel. The lights continued to buzz and flicker, as if they didn't have enough electricity to remain lit. My sneakers squeaked against the sticky linoleum floor. I found room 104 and stood outside, holding the key in my hand and debating whether or not to go in. What if this was some sort of elaborate trap? What if this was the stalker and he was waiting for me on the other side of the room? I dug my cell phone out of my pocket. I would call the cops. I would have them take me to the nearest police station, and I'd find some way to hang out there for the rest of the night. It wouldn't be pleasant or comfortable, but at least I'd be safe. I was dialing when I heard a loud banging sound from the motel lobby. I turned around, looking at the closed door that separated me from the lobby. It sounded like someone was pounding on the walls. I suddenly felt vulnerable and exposed. I fumbled with the key, then unlocked room 104 and stepped inside. It was an average motel room, containing a bed, a dresser, and a desk with a chair. A bulky-looking TV set was sitting on top of the dresser, its rabbit ear antenna poking up awkwardly. I locked the door behind me and searched the room as thoroughly as I could, checking in the closet and under the bed before entering the bathroom. I pulled back the shower curtain. The sight of the empty tub didn't fill me with the relief I'd hoped for. The relative quiet was shattered by a ringing phone. I left the bathroom and walked back into the main room. A black rotary phone was sitting on the dresser. It was ringing. I stared at it stupidly, wondering who was on the other end. Was it my stalker? Or was it whoever had left me the note instructing me to come here? I reached for it with trembling hands and picked it up. Hello? Lock the door and turn on the TV. The voice on the other end belonged to a woman. It was thin and raspy, as if she was a heavy smoker. Turn on the TV and turn the volume up all the way. Who is this? I asked. Turn on the TV, she repeated, her voice terse, and turn the volume up all the way. I walked over to the TV and switched it on. Okay. The TV's on. Turn the volume up, then open the window next to the bed, the voice continued. You're on the first floor. Climb up the fire escape to the roof. I'm waiting for you up there. But who are you? I asked, what's going on? You want out of the love letter challenge, don't you? Asked the voice. Then do what I say. Turn up the TV, open the window, and get up to the roof. Listen, I just want to know. I was interrupted by a loud click, followed by the dial tone. I slammed the phone down in the cradle, frustrated. I looked over at the TV set. Some dumb sitcom was blaring. I reached out and turned the knob, cranking up the volume all the way. Once the sound was unbearably loud, I opened the window and climbed out. I looked up at the night sky, squinting to try and make out the roof of the building. I obviously couldn't see whether or not anyone was up there. Sighing heavily, I started climbing the fire escape. After what felt like hours, I made it up to the roof. I looked around, hugging myself against the chilly wind that had started to pick up. Standing by the door, I saw a tall, slender figure. I squinted, unable to make out much in the gloom besides the burning red end of a cigarette. I approached the smoking figure slowly. Who are you? I called out. What do you want? I want to help you. It was the same raspy voice I'd heard on the phone earlier. My name's Susan. Susan, heard of me, have you? Bet you saw my post about the challenge. Thought I was an idiot for meeting him, did ya? Her eyes glittered in the low light of her cigarette. Blowing out the smoke, she sighed. A lot of things have changed since that night. Why me? What is the love letter challenge? She stepped closer and told me that the original challenge was just like it was described. A way to meet new people and make friends. But as it grew in popularity, a small group began using it as a way to stalk, terrorize and hunt people. They chose participants and challenged each other to complete more and more depraved acts on random strangers. Sometimes they would stalk them for years, ruining their lives in the process. Susan wouldn't discuss how she escaped, only that she came to an agreement with her friend he still plays the game. When someone is entered without their knowledge, I try to help them if I can, before it's too late. Susan ground out her cigarette and dug the pack out of her jacket pocket. It's almost too late for you. The flame of the lighter exposed her face. She was beautiful like an old-time movie star, but sad too. What do you mean too late? I demanded. As the story sank in, I began to get angry. It's about to get worse. Life as you know it is over. Time to make a choice, Kate. Why did they choose me? I didn't enter. You said so yourself. No, someone put your name in the pot. I point in the details and try to keep newbies from getting hurt, so when I found out what was going on I tried to stop him. He wants to be your knight in shining armor. Wants to rescue you from all your troubles. Once he thinks you've had enough, that is. That's sick. No one I know would do that. Guess you don't know him as well as you think. She threw her cigarette butt into the darkness. Time to choose. 1. You disappear, fake your death if you like and start over someplace far away. Or 2, I give you his name. You can go to the police, or try to make a deal with him, or whatever. Either way you won't see me again unless I want you to. Susan walked past me to the door and pulled it open. The light hurt my eyes, but I see her holding up an envelope. So, I barely hesitate. Tell me who it is. I have to know who did this. Well, unexpected, but good for you. She pockets the envelope and pulls what looks like a business card from her back pocket. As I reach out to take it, I see that she's missing the smallest 2 fingers from her left hand. Good luck, Kate. You might need it. Back in my room, under the light, I see a name written on the card, Fox. I felt my stomach churn. It had to be some kind of trick. I barely knew Susan. But Fox and I had been friends since middle school. I had to know for sure. I drove back toward his duplex and knocked on the door at almost midnight. Fox came to the door half drunk and covered in Cheeto stains. Kate, why are you here so late? I slipped inside and closed the door, trying to calm my nerves. Then I told him everything that had happened so far. He didn't move an inch. He just nodded and listened as I told him the sick, twisted truth about the love letter challenge. So, it was just a scam for stalkers to hunt down their victims. What a bunch of dicks, Fox said. I omitted the part Susan had told me about him. I sighed in relief as he held me in his arms. "It's all right, you're safe now." I held him tight and looked about the room. I had nearly calmed down when I saw it. A roll of duct tape, ripped with bits of marker stained on it. The same that had bound my wrists when I was taken. And right next to it, a bottle of chloroform. My body went stiff. I pushed Fox away. "It was you." The face he wore to appease me disappeared. I looked around and quickly grabbed a pair of scissors. "Kate. I can explain." He told me. But I was done. This had to end now. I didn't know about the stalkers. I didn't know they did that to the girls they met. I thought it was harmless fun. I wanted to believe him. I thought of all the ways that he had lied to me in the past. I'm not proud of what I did. But I grabbed the scissors and pinned him to the wall. "Kate. You won't hurt me," he said with a smile. He was wrong about that. He was wrong about everything. I stabbed him hard in the neck, once. Twice. 5 times. He bled out like a stuck pig. My hands were shaking. I stood over him and walked almost like a zombie to his laptop. I turned it on and saw multiple feeds pull up. Faces I didn't recognize on various feeds. Girls that were being monitored from their webcam, and on the side a list of members that were watching the girls. This was the True Love Letter Challenge. These sick men were monitoring their victims and stalking them until they got the chance to kidnap them. And Fox. He had been at the head of this particular branch. All thanks to a stupid internet prank. It made my blood boil. I felt so helpless staring at the screen, realizing that nothing could stop it. It was too big. Then I thought back to what Susan said. I met her later that afternoon, to show her proof that Fox was gone. One less stalker to worry about. Her efforts to save my life had worked. "You did good, Kate. Better than I even expected," Susan admitted. "I don't think I want to stop," I told her. "I want to do option 1. Disappear." "Why the hell would you do that? Your problems are over." I showed her the list of the IP addresses I had pulled from Fox's hard drive. There had to be at least 100. I think it's about time that the predators became the prey. Story 4, Bethany in the Bush. Growing up, I lived in a rural area of Australia. It was a quiet place with not much to do. Our closest neighbors were half an hour away, so it was mostly just my older brother Stephen and I that would play on weekends. Often, we would spend hours going deeper into the bush that surrounded our property in search of places to fish or swim. I was 11 at the time and my brother was 14. It was school holidays for us, which meant if we finished our chores we could do whatever we wanted for the rest of the day. Our parents weren't too worried about our adventures as long as we got back in time for dinner. On this day my brother led the way, and rather than the aimless wandering we would usually do, he wanted to show me something he had been working on while I had been staying at my friend's house. It took a few hours of walking, but we arrived near a creek. He had cut a decrepit tree down and used the log to make a ladder leading up a large red gum tree. The branches were sturdy enough to hold us and we spent the day diving off it. Towards the afternoon I was skipping rocks while my brother sat lazily on the branches. I was searching for some more rocks when I heard a branch snap in the distance. It got my attention, but I didn't think too much of it. There was always plenty of snakes, lizards and kangaroos around, but if you left them alone and kept a safe distance they usually did the same. I continued searching when I heard leaves rustling. As I looked up, a pink shoe appeared from behind the tree and a small body followed it. About 20 meters from me there was a girl standing amongst the trees just staring at me. She looked about Stephen's age. I remember thinking it was weird how pale she was. Especially in this area, everyone had some sort of tan from the sun. For a moment we just stared at each other. I was surprised to see someone else out here as we lived so far from anyone else. After a moment I called out to her and she started to walk towards us. I yelled to my brother, who climbed down to see who she was. The closer she got, the more I noticed how dirty her clothes were, and not only that, but they were way too big for her small frame. She was a few meters from us when she froze in place and continued to stare. My brother introduced us both, but she still didn't say anything. I noticed her hands were shaking almost as if she feared us. After a few awkward glances between each other, I told her if she wanted to play with us she could at least tell us her name. Her straight face suddenly became animated and she spoke quickly. I'm Bethany. Mother always told me to introduce myself. That's my problem, you know, I never listen. My brother asked her where she lived and why we had never seen her at school. She told us that she was visiting her aunt. My brother asked her what her auntie's name was, but Bethany said she didn't know, she just called her auntie. It was strange, but we just moved on and kept talking. Well, Stephen and I did most the talking and she just stood there awkwardly. Being late in the afternoon, Stephen told me that we needed to head back for dinner or we'd be late. Bethany suddenly became more vocal and asked, "Do you want to see something cool?" She smiled after she said it, but it seemed unnatural. This was the first time her face had shown any emotion and it made me feel uncomfortable, and it still does when I think about it. My brother asked her what she wanted to show us, and to this day I can still hear her voice in my head word for word. A dead body. I couldn't think of anything I wanted to see less than a dead body, but it caught Stephen's interest. "Where'd you find it?" he asked. When Bethany answered, she spoke so softly I could barely hear her. "Not far from here, if you want to see it." I didn't like this at all. My brother would always make fun of me for being a wimp, but not only did I not want to see a dead body, I also didn't want to get in trouble. Bethany insisted it wouldn't take long and Stephen told me I could go home if I was scared. I begged him to come home with me, tittering on the edge of a tantrum. Stephen called me a wimp and told me to go home if I wanted, but he was going to see it. I thought about it for a moment and decided I didn't want to walk home alone and announced I would go but wasn't going to look at it. Bethany gave me a weak smile and without saying anything she started heading back through the bushes she had appeared from. I kept a safe distance, so I wouldn't accidentally see the body, but Stephen kept close to Bethany and wouldn't stop talking. I was jealous at the time, but in hindsight, he was trying to impress her. After half an hour of walking through the bush it became apparent that it wasn't close to us at all. Bethany said she had just found it in an abandoned house on the property and hadn't told anyone about it yet. We walked for probably another half hour and the sun was beginning to go down. We came to a clearing where the thick trees ended and the tall grass started. A few hundred meters in front of us was a decrepit wooden farmhouse. The wood was rotting and the rusted tin roof looked like it would fall if a slight breeze passed. I had second thoughts about going in and watched Stephen and Bethany start walking towards the house. I had stopped walking and couldn't take my eyes off the house when suddenly the outline of a man's body moved past one of the windows. They were only 100 meters from the house when I caught up and grabbed Stephen's arm and told him I saw someone in there. As the words left my mouth, Bethany let out a loud whistle and attached herself to Stephen's free arm. He started yelling and spun around trying to throw her off. To my horror, a man burst out of the doorway of the house and started to run towards us. In desperation I started kicking and punching Bethany as Stephen started pushing her off. Eventually her grip loosened and he ripped his arm free. I looked up and saw the man more clearly. He was just as pale as Bethany and was the thinnest person I'd ever seen. He was wielding a machete above his head as he ran towards us. Stephen screamed at me to run and we both took off running as fast as we could. I looked over my shoulder in pure terror to see this man run past Bethany as she was getting up. All his teeth were baring. I can only describe his look as one of a predator closing in on his prey. I looked back in front of me and continued to run when suddenly I felt an arm grab the back of my shirt. And let out a yelp only to find it was Stephen making sure he didn't lose me. We crashed through the bushes scraping our legs and arms as we pushed through anything that was in our way. I could hear the sticks and brush break as the man charged through after us. I had no idea where we were going. I just continued to follow my brother who was dragging me by my shirt. We came to a creek and he practically threw me in and we started swimming across as fast we could. I heard the water splash behind us moments later. Stephen had made it to the creek bed before me and as I got to my feet I saw him with a rock in his hand. The man was over halfway across when Stephen started throwing rocks. He yelled at me to keep running and I did. I heard the man scream as one of Stephen's rocks hit him. I turned around to see the man swimming back across as my brother kept throwing rocks. The man got back out of the water and I watched him and my brother stare at each other. The look this man gave us was one of absolute evil and hatred. Stephen turned and started running towards me. I saw Bethany join the man on the side of the creek as they both continued staring. Stephen ordered me to keep running and that's exactly what I did. Eventually we had to stop and Stephen dragged me to the ground as we took deep rapid breaths, still trying to hide just in case they were following us. It took hours to find our way back in the dark and was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. When we finally got home my mum was there, but my dad was out looking for us. We told her what had happened and she locked all the doors then called the police. This was before mobile phones, so we just sat inside with all the doors locked and waited for my dad to come home. My mother called our neighbors and they were freaked out. Nothing like this happened in our town. Our neighbors knew the house we were talking about immediately. It was on their property. When my dad got home he sat in a chair in front of our door with his hunting rifle all night and into the morning. Our town had a very small police force, so they came to our property that night, but it took till about 8 a.m. the next morning for another 2 officers to come out. When they got to the farmhouse, no one was there. They said the squatters left in a hurry because there was so much left behind. The most chilling part was that Bethany wasn't lying. In the house they found the body of a woman. I only learned this as I got older, but the machete the man was wielding had been used before. What was strange is that they couldn't identify this woman. She wasn't a local and DNA wasn't a thing back then. They posted a sketch of her but to my knowledge nothing ever came of it. Our neighbors and police checked any other abandoned buildings known on surrounding properties but there were no sign of them. It was as if they vanished into thin air. I still wonder about Bethany. There is so many questions. Was that woman her mother? Was she being forced to do what she did? We moved closer into the city a few years after that, but it took a long time before I stopped having nightmares about it. Stephen beat himself up over it for many years and stopped calling me a wimp after that day. We are both very protective parents of our own children and even though mine have moved out I still get this urge to call or drop by every so often to see if everything's okay. It's kind of a family joke between my wife and kids but it's something I will never stop doing. Story 5, I took exit 135D on the Garden State Parkway in New Jersey. An exit that doesn't exist. I was driving back home from work late one night when I noticed Google Maps indicating that there was a crash on the Garden State Parkway. Great, I thought to myself. The ETA shot up from 35 minutes to an hour and a half. Must have been some big-ass crash for the ETA to go up by an hour. So, the stretch of the parkway that I commute on has a speed limit of 55 miles per hour, but if you've ever been here, you'll know that hardly anyone drives below 75. I mean, what kind of inbred thought that it was a good idea to limit the speed to 55 on a 5-lane parkway where you don't even have trucks? So obviously, no one follows the speed limit. That being said, people drive like maniacs up here, although, I'm sure most of us feel the same way about all our states. So inevitably, when we do have crashes on the parkway, they're usually pretty horrific. The ETA shooting up so drastically was mildly surprising since there were hardly any cars around me at all. But then again, it was almost midnight on a Saturday. We were going through our busy season which meant working on weekends. I sighed out loud and decided to take the next exit that crossed my path. Driving through all the towns wouldn't be enjoyable but it would still get me home faster. I had just crossed exit 135, so I figured I'd have to take exit 136. To my surprise, I noticed a board for exit 135D. I hadn't noticed any boards for exits 135A, B, or C. Hell, I didn't even remember ever noticing any exits between 135 and 136. I checked the maps and they didn't indicate any such exit. That should have been my first red flag. My gut told me to skip this exit and use the next one, but if we listened to our gut all the time, our/no-sleep would be a dead place. As I drove towards the exit, I noticed the green board with the exit's name was faded and chipped off at places. It was dark and late at night, so I thought I'd just imagined it. I soon crossed a board that I believe said entering the township of Moorestown. I laughed at the thought that this town was probably a rip-off of Morristown, a pretty sweet town close to where I live. I looked at my cell phone on the GPS holder and it indicated that I had lost network. Fuck Verizon, I thought to myself. I drove for another 5 to 10 minutes before realizing my GPS still indicated that my car was on the parkway, stationary. Weird, but maybe the lack was network was fucking with Google Maps. The town itself was silent, but again it must have been a little past midnight, so I figured maybe this wasn't exactly the type of town that enjoyed its nightlife. The street lights were extremely dim and the night was foggy, so I actually had to switch my car's lights to the high beam mode. It's unsafe especially when you're driving through a town, but there were absolutely no cars around, so I figured I was fine. I'd dim them down if I saw somebody. That's when I noticed a few people standing at a bus stop. I hadn't seen any buses since I had gotten in here, which again was odd. I slowed down near the bus stop to ask them for directions to the next town. As I approached them, I saw them staring blankly into nothingness. All of them were dressed in black. By this time, I was growing a little concerned. Concerned by the fact that there didn't seem to be any cars or buses in this town. Concerned by the fact that every single shop seemed closed. Concerned by the fact that the only people I'd seen so far, seemed like they hadn't seen sunlight in years. They turned their heads in my direction and start slowly dragging themselves towards my car, as I slowed down. I say dragging and not walking because their movement seemed to indicate that their minds wanted to stay put but their bodies forced them to move. I didn't stop. These didn't seem to be the type of people who'd be helpful. I noticed that the boards outside most of the shops still indicated that they were open, but the lights were turned off, flickering on and off in some cases. My concern was growing. I approached a huge building that appeared to be the town hall. There was a man sitting on one of the benches. As I drove past him, he stood up and waved at me, smiling. He too was dressed in a black suit but looked really ragged. Something about his smile made me shudder. I'd been driving for a good 20 minutes before I realized that I should have hit the next town by then. That's when I heard voices. Murmuring, reciting, and chanting. I looked around as I drove but couldn't identify the source. The voices were getting louder, and whether I liked it or not, it seemed like I was soon going to find out where the voices were coming from. I had to ram my brakes so loud that my car screeched. Passing before me was a funeral procession. A funeral procession at fucking midnight. There were at least 100 people walking, a casket being carried around by some of them in the middle. They all walked slowly, with expressionless faces, taking no notice of me. They were chanting something but I couldn't understand a word of it. There were so many of them walking so slow that I had no chance of cutting through them without the fear of running them over. It had been a few minutes since the head of the procession had passed me, and I was waiting for the entire black parade to end, so I could drive by. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw what would probably give me nightmares for ages. It seemed like the procession had gone around the block and was approaching my car from behind. Only this time, they seemed to be moving faster. And then I finally saw it, a gap between the groups of people walking. I hit the gas pedal as hard as I could have, and sped through. As I drove through, I looked into the rear view mirror again and only saw darkness. They were all gone, the streets were empty. As though none of them were even there. I didn't intend on slowing down anymore, and a few minutes later I saw a board that pointed to a ramp onto the Garden State Parkway. That was all I needed. I sped onto the parkway and was extremely relieved when I saw a few cars drive by. My cellular network was back on. I checked the time and it was still midnight. It was as though time hadn't moved at all since I had gotten off the parkway. The crash had apparently cleared up and I was home in about 30 minutes. I drive by exits 135 and 136 every day on my way to work, and I haven't seen exit 135D again. Remember, if you ever do see any weird exits, refrain from using them, and if you see a town called Moorestown, stay away from it at all costs. Story 6, To those who suffer from chronic sleep paralysis. My big sister died 5 years ago from sudden unexplained nocturnal death syndrome. My family's moving soon, so I was given the task of cleaning out her room. This was a note I found under her mattress. To those who suffer from chronic sleep paralysis. So, this is kind of weird to explain, and frankly it's going to be disorganized just cause I'm a total wreck right now, but please just hear me out. This is for your own good. Okay. The notion that you're just hallucinating during sleep paralysis is completely false. I know, there are all types of scientific explanations for sleep paralysis, and don't get me wrong, they do seem to make sense, but the fact of the matter is, they're incorrect. Did you actually think that your mind could make up such grotesque and horrifying images? You really think your brain could just conjure up the shadowy figure with the sharp nails and knife-like teeth, or the old man ripping his own intestines out of his gut? Do you actually believe that the hands you feel tightening around your throat during these episodes of sleep paralysis are fake? Dear reader, the time bomb you hear growing louder and louder is not an auditory hallucination. These hallucinations, or whatever the hell you want to call them, are not figments of your imagination. They are real attempts at your life. Look, I know I sound insane right now, but please just keep reading. Have you ever wondered how people could just die in their sleep? Like, how does sudden unexplained nocturnal death syndrome or sudden infant death syndrome even happen? They say that people can't die from sleep paralysis, and they're right. People don't die from sleep paralysis. They are killed by the beings that induce sleep paralysis. Ugh, this is so weird to explain. Okay, so there are evil beings in this world, and these evil beings want nothing more than to terrorize and wreak havoc on humanity. Humans are the most vulnerable when they are unconscious, right? So, naturally it would make sense for these beings to come after you while you're sleeping. These entities are smart. They come for you in your sleep, and they don't leave any marks when they inflict pain on you. They do this on purpose. They want you to doubt yourself. Because it couldn't possibly have been real if I don't have any marks to show for it. Yeah, right. That's what I thought too. I know you probably have some questions like, why don't they just kill me and get it over with? Or, but why me? Honestly, I'm not really sure myself, but I think that these things, they thrive off of fear. They hunger for it. Their goal is to induce as much pain and horror on you before they take you. Think of it as seasoning a turkey before you eat it, but in this case, you're the turkey and the fear is the seasoning. As for why they chose you, I don't know. Maybe you're an awful person and you deserve to suffer, or maybe you just looked like a good snack. Who knows? The fact of the matter is, if you're experiencing sleep paralysis, you're probably in danger. Reader, I am just like you. I suffer from constant sleep paralysis, and each night these episodes become more frequent and more difficult to snap out of. The thing that stuffs its mangled hand into my mouth and claws at my throat each night is getting stronger. Its grin is getting wider. It's gotten to the point where I don't even have to be asleep to see this demon. I see it when I look at my reflection, faintly lingering behind me. I see it when I blink. I sense its presence around me always. To be honest with you, I'm terrified. I want this to end so badly. God, I just want to be able to sleep again. There's nothing I can do about this, though. It's too late for me. This note isn't a cry for help because I know that I'm already a dead girl. This is a warning. Listen, when I die, the doctors will say I went peacefully in my sleep. This is not true. Each night is utter mental and physical anguish for me. The demons surrounding me and you during sleep paralysis are real. Everything we experience during sleep paralysis is real. Please believe me or don't, but the next time you feel nails scratching across your chest and teeth scraping your eyelids, just remember this warning and realize that there will come a day when you won't be able to wake up. Story 7, The Cave. My family and I recently moved into a slightly larger house in a beautiful, rural area of Maine. The town consists of maybe 40 people. The house is nothing awe-inspiring, but the price was incredible, and the view followed suit. It sat on a couple acres. The backyard showed dense, green forests, and the front led to a quiet, country road with hardly any drivers. For my family of 3, it was perfect. The closest house next to us was a few miles down the road, and the woods provided a perfect, natural barrier in between us. At night, all we could hear were the singing crickets and the wind brushing its way softly through the trees. Coming from a bustling city, it was unbelievably serene. We spent the first week getting settled in. We explored the surrounding areas and visited the local town to get acquainted with some of our new shops and locals. Everyone seemed so upbeat and excited to meet us. We don't get too many out-of-towners around these parts. What brings you to our town? One of the shopkeepers asked. I grinned, mainly work, but this crisp, mountain air is a little addicting. May have some permanent residence on your hands. He cut his eyes at me as he slowly shook his head and scoffed. I doubt that. I was a little taken aback. I grabbed my bags and headed back to the car. I could feel his gaze peer into me as I left. Guess every town has to have at least one asshole, right? I chuckled to myself as I loaded my car and headed back to the house. Night came quickly as the air cooled and the sun faded into the trees. I put my daughter Aurora to bed, grabbed a glass of Merlot, and joined my wife on the swing on our front porch. We sat in silence, enjoying the still night and fresh air. I put my arm around my wife and pulled her closer. I could get used to this, I said as I lifted the wine glass to my face. She just looked at me and smiled. Then, almost like someone flipped a switch, the breeze halted. Do you smell that? I asked, confused. It almost smells like something's burning. Are you cooking? I don't smell anything, my wife chimed in, shaking her head. I got up and ran inside. Everything was still. The stove was off, and the oven was cold, yet the smell remained. It was insufferable. I opened some windows to get some airflow coursing through the house. I couldn't handle it. After checking all the gas outlets and appliances, I chugged another glass of wine and hurried to bed. I woke up at 3 in a panicked state. My heart raced and sweat trickled down my face. I reached for a water bottle, but my hands were trembling. I sat up to catch my breath. I had no recollection of having a nightmare or any dream at all for that matter. I was clueless as to why I was panicking. My wife laid motionless beside me, with the occasional grunt and drawn-out snore. I rubbed my eyes and focused on my breathing. That's when a light beamed through our window. It was the motion sensor light. The woods were close, so animals aren't a rare occurrence. I got up and peered through the window. It was dark, only the circle where the light illuminated the ground was visible. As my eyes swept across the area, they were met by something small. I squinted in hopes to make out what it was. Feet? From a person? I scooted closer to the window, face almost pressed against the glass. I jumped back as I saw the feet step backwards into the black background. I grabbed the Louisville Slugger that rested in the corner of the room and ran to the back door. I gazed outside to no avail, it was too dark to see anything. I opened the door and shined the flashlight through the forest's edge. If something turned the motion sensor on, it was gone now. It was quiet, and nothing was obviously visible. I shut the door and locked it, grabbing some water as I retreated back to bed. The next morning, as my wife took our daughter to school, I decided to explore a little further into the woods. I walked in the direction I saw the person go. After walking about a mile and a half, I stumbled upon a tree with a yellow circle painted onto it. Hunters? I pondered to myself. As I continued forward, I ran into another painted tree. Then another. I looked around and noticed they formed a large perimeter around a massive opening in the ground. This cave was immense. I shined my light into the cave, but it's as if the light could not penetrate the thick layers of darkness that resonated out of it. I was immediately submerged in dread. Just staring into the cave was making my brain send fight or flight signals throughout my body. I gripped my flashlight tight and without hesitation, ran as hard as I could back through the woods. My wife had returned home from the school and already left again for work. I tried to open my laptop and get some work done, but I was teeming with anxiety. I didn't even know why. The rest of the day passed by like a foggy dream. My head raced with thoughts as I lay awake in bed. I closed my eyes and rubbed my temples in hopes of finding some relief. I need a drink. I stumble to my feet, grabbing the wall as my head spins. I close my eyes to collect myself. As I open them back up, the motion sensor light fills our room again. I pull the curtain back to see somebody barely in view this time. It was a barefoot little girl. As her face came into view, I saw that it was my daughter Aurora, still in her night clothes and staring directly into my window. Our gazes meet, as she steps back and runs into the forest. "Wait!" I shouted through the window. Parental instinct took over, and before I could even process a thought, I was running through the dense woods. I could hear her scared voice trailing off just ahead of me. I ran for about 15 minutes straight before the adrenaline slowly wore off and I had to stop to catch my breath. A faint light echoed ahead through the trees. I slowly and quietly avoided debris as I crept towards the unknown light, passing the yellow-marked trees on my way. A man could be heard aggressively yelling. I poked my head out from behind a tree. A tall, slender man stood with a torch in his hand, surrounded by at least 25 other people. All of them dressed in white, hooded robes and black, featureless masks. They stand in a wide circle at the mouth of the cave and begin chanting what sounded like Latin as one of the hooded figures removed their mask. It was Aurora. Qui costiarius senux resurgimus, dici quatum vestra terra. She turned her gaze to the bitter blackness of the cave and sprinted into it. I stared on in pure horror. Qui costiarius senux resurgimus, dici quatum vestra terra. The ground shook beneath my feet like an unreal earthquake. I fell to the ground and crawled backwards till my back met a tree. I lifted myself up, before gathering the courage to run back through the woods. I could hear the chanting turn to yelling as they continued. "Rise, old one." A bright light pierced through the edge of the woods leading to my house. I trekked through the overgrowth and brush before being hit by a thick cloud of smoke. I covered my mouth with my shirt and pressed on. When I pierced the edge of the woods, I was met by my house, completely up in flames. Every inch too was burning to a cinder. I fell to my knees. My wife stood in our bedroom, slamming her fists on the window and screaming for help. The smell was insufferable. The hooded figures marched from beyond the wall of smoke towards me. I gasped for air before my face met the cold, hard embrace of the ground. They continued marching forward as I slipped into unconsciousness. My eyes shot open. The clock flashed 3 as my heart raced and sweat trickled down my face. I reached for a water bottle, but my hands were trembling. I sat up to catch my breath, but I was met by my wife, who was sitting up at a 90-degree angle, eyes still sealed shut, and whispering softly into my ear, "He's here," before laying back down. I rubbed my eyes and tried to focus on my breathing. That's when a light beamed through our window. Story 8, Holidays are serious in my reality, and I need you for Easter. I come from a world parallel to yours, where holidays are a sacred part of our culture and we celebrate them in ways you'd consider strange or twisted. The word holiday came from holy day, didn't it? So we love to treat them like they're the holiest and most hallowed things to exist in human civilization. Because of that, it's quite lovely where I come from. On Martin Luther King Jr. Day, our society has a designated playtime where little white children and little black children can have fun together. On Thanksgiving, we organize turkey hunts, people of Native American heritage gathering around tables to share the caught turkey with anyone of English descent. During Hanukkah, each town keeps an oil lamp lit for 8 days straight, and it's a pleasure every year to sit around your town's lantern and chat about life. On February 2nd, Punxsutawney Phil the groundhog really does determine what days are part of spring on our calendar. And on Labor Day, everyone does community service so they can get a taste of how the upstanding workers of their community work every day of the week to keep society's wheels turning. But every coin has two sides, and my culture's obsession with holidays has a rusted, darker side with no sheen on its copper. When beautiful autumn arrives and the harvest season ends, red, orange, and yellow leaves decorating the landscape with awe, we slit the throats of our livestock and burn them in honor of the Celtic gods. Halloween is what it's called, and like fall shows the darkest season of the year is coming, Halloween tells us the most brutal holidays will arrive in mere months. On Christmas Eve, the Santa Patrol, which is our government's military force responsible for handling the event of Christmas, marches from door to door dressed in Santa and elf costumes. And in the spirit of Christianity's punishment system, they reward the nice children with presents and drag away the naughty children to burn and scream in the government Christmas camps. With the Santa Patrol pressuring the misbehaving kids to be nice under the threat of live burning, we have no juvenile delinquents in our society. I know so firsthand. My niece was a bad influence on my nephew, but after the Santa Patrol took her away like Krampus did to bratty children in Hungarian mythology, my nephew stayed nice and wholesome. So Christmas and the roasting of the bad children work out as beneficial for civilization at the end of the day, for the splendid result justifies them. If you think the Christmas from my reality is horrible, I'm sorry to tell you that Columbus Day is about slaughtering people with Native American ancestry, which is a bummer since it makes Thanksgiving a tad more difficult to celebrate. We can't use modern weapons, however, since matchlock muskets and swords were what the conquistadors used during the exploration age. To celebrate St. Valentine's Day, we select 2 random people in the country with the name Valentine or Valentinus and kill them to show our remembrance of the Roman executions of the original St. Valentines on February 14th. Giving your baby the name Valentine is a certain death sentence, many suicidal folks in our society attempting to kill themselves every spring by changing their legal name to Valentine. If you can think of a holiday you have in your world, whether it be religious or secular, we have a version of it you may find too freakish or dark for your liking. On Mother's Day and Father's Day, we outlaw contraception of all kinds and ban abortion in all instances regardless of maternal mortality likelihood, because the existence of parents is something to commemorate. April Fool's Day is a time when those with IQs lower than 70 are given temporary access to nuclear weapons. El Cinco de Mayo is when the law permits Mexicans to kill French tourists with no legal repercussions. The National Day of Service and Remembrance of the 9/11 attacks is a day where the government crashes planes into random skyscrapers and office blocks across the country, so most people don't work on that day. But there's one holiday I've come to hate, and it's the reason why I am joining your reality, Easter. Each April, the government enters every adult man and woman into a lottery, the winner of which becomes the Christ. The Christ, as the term has come to be, travels to Washington, D.C., where the government pins them down and nails their hands into a cross. They raise the cross, and the Christ is left to bleed and scorch to death in the baking sun, bawling and shrieking in fiery agony. Once the Christ is dead, every prison inmate who accepts the Christ's ultimate sacrifice is allowed to go free. For petty thieves or those wrongly incarcerated, it's a second chance. But for psychotic murderers, rapists, and fanatical terrorists, it's a chance to do more of the same. At the end of every Easter, after the Christ is dead and the prisoners leave their confinements, mass anarchy ensues. It was during this annual terror when I lost my wife to a gang reminiscent of the Droogs from the movie A Clockwork Orange. And I never recovered after all those years I spent alone. To make matters worse, I, a little sad man, won this year's Easter lottery. That's a 1/325 million chance of being chosen, and yet the government's supposed to ship me to DC tomorrow morning. I'm sure you're wondering why I look exactly like you. Same hair. Same eyes. Same nose. Same DNA. You are this universe's version of me. I am my reality's version of you. We are doppelgangers of each other, and I can't stand another minute in that god-awful Easter-ridden reality. In this world at least, holidays are light-hearted and stupid, not violent and totalitarian. Believe me when I say I liked the fun and seriousness of the holidays back home, but I need a change. I'm not fond of rusty, giant nails slamming through my palms, splattering blood as they pierce the back end of my hand with the stench of hot sweat beading off my contorting face. So I'm afraid you may have to take my place. And remember, just because you'll be in pain doesn't mean it'll be a bad thing. You'll be sparing falsely imprisoned convicts with your sacrifice. And more importantly, you'll be saving me. With love. A citizen of the Federated States of America. Story 9, when I was growing up I had a cousin that was called by the woods. When I was growing up, I had a cousin. Her name was Kendra and her family's home was surrounded by a few miles of forest. I won't tell you what state this was in for a plethora of reasons. I lived a few miles away from where Kendra lived. I was at her house more than I was at mine. She had everything I could ever dream of. A big house, no siblings, and best of all, a dog. The dog was a German Shepherd Malamute Wolf, Lord knows what else, mix. Kendra found her roaming around the woods. Kendra later named her Shadow. Kendra and I were 6 at the time. The vet guesstimated that Shadow was 7 years old at the time. We loved to explore the woods and Shadow would go with us. Even though she was always off-leash, she would always come back home to us. The winter Shadow died we were 14. The cold wind and snow was blowing around outside. Shadow was lying right next to the fireplace. Kendra just looked up at me from her book and whispered, "It is the end," and looked at Shadow. It looked like 1,000 colors erupted from Shadow's body and formed a shape of a wolf above Shadow. The wolf then raised his head, howled, and ran to the forest. I will admit it reminded me of the scene in the last episode of the original Thundercats where the cat in the Eye of Thundera ran and unfroze the other Thundercats. We both got up and ran to check on Shadow only to discover her dead. I do not know how Kendra knew what was going to happen, but she always had a spiritual connection to the wild. And Shadow was truly wild like Kendra. Even on the day, Kendra knew. I still remember the sadness in her eyes as she turned to me and said, "I will miss you, but the wild calls to me. I will always be here with Shadow but I must go. Please don't mourn for long. One day you will hear the call of the wild too. Just follow Shadow. The forest needs a sacrifice. It is my time. I am doing this so nobody else will have to. Just follow Shadow at your time. And make sure others do not. I am not crazy." Goodbye, friend. I also saw a type of understanding in her bright jade green eyes. I will always remember her last words. Those were the most words I have ever heard her say. She was always so quiet. Before she ran off, I swear I saw Shadow in front of her. That was impossible though. It had been a year since Shadow died. I tried to follow her, but she ran through bushes and no matter how effortless she made it look, I could not follow her through the bushes. I remember running faster than I have ever run to get back to Kendra's parents' home. I made them follow me back to where she ran off and told them everything that happened. They immediately called the cops. The police dogs led the cops straight to her body. Somebody had slit her neck. Her beautiful, long, blonde hair was matted with blood. They never caught her killer. Her parents moved to Canada a few years later. I bought the house from them and have been living here ever since. I now hear the call Kendra heard all those years ago. I'm going to go investigate. I assume I will be killed too. I see Shadow looking at me now. She beckons and I must follow. If you ever see a pure black wolf dog calling you in the forest, do not follow. I am not crazy. Goodbye, friend. Story 10, I'm so sorry Lola. Never again. It was another shitty morning. I woke to the curse of a hangover and a stomach still at war over one too many pickled sausages the night before. Mornings like this were becoming very common for me on this little island of Okinawa. Being in the military meant two things: we worked long hours and drank even longer. At the time I was just an airman in the United States Air Force. I had a girlfriend, lived in the dorms and explored the island often. For those of you who don't know, Okinawa is an island about 70 miles long by 20 miles wide, just south of mainland Japan. It is home to Kadena AB, my current station. Being able to come to Okinawa was a dream come true. I was blessed to have this opportunity and I consistently went out and soaked in the culture of the island for my first year. Until I discovered Lola. She was a beautiful grey parrot and was on display in a small animal shop located just south of the city Naha. Every time I would visit, Lola would talk to me, usually saying things like, "Good day morning, good day morning." Sometimes she would tell me how happy she is that I visited. I fell in love after many stops there and before I knew it I had a new little friend. Now, airmen are not allowed to have animals in the dorms with exemption to turtles and fish. However, I loved Lola so much already that I wasn't taking her back. She hid in one of the giant closets I have in my room. Lola rested comfortably with a brand new cage with all the assortments a parrot would need. When I left for work, the closet would be shut and locked, so if a room inspection were to happen, she would be safe. During inspections, the inspector cannot look in a closet that is locked. Lola was happy. I took her all around the island, spent hours training her to trust me and to speak many different words and phrases. This went on for well over a year, and her progress with talking was exceptionally fast compared to what other parrots should be able to learn at. In just a year's time she was close to speaking over 150 phrases and 200 words. She was amazingly fun and interesting, well, besides for one thing. I kept a listing of words I was teaching Lola and which ones she was picking up on. Though, once in a while she would say a word or phrase that I never taught her. It would be something I myself never would find myself saying in 100 years. It never bothered me much until that first dreadful night. Lola would always sleep through the night and never spoke a word. However, that night she did. I had fallen asleep and was deeply entranced by a dream until I woke to the sounds of Lola rattling around in her cage. She was whispering. Well, the way a parrot would sound if it tried to whisper. Bye 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 bye, who's there, why, tsk tsk tsk, I see and tch him. Sleep, time to sleep, are you a friend too? I could not move, something about Lola's whispering had me frozen. She's never done this before. The sound of her whispering was bone-chilling. Eventually I found the courage to sit up and look over towards the closet. He awake n. Now no bye please say leave or we will skin you. Ooh. I heard movement from within the closet. It wasn't from the cage, however, it was like a shuffling against wood. Something was sliding around in there. Suddenly I heard the closet door open slowly. I panicked, flicked on the room light and stood up quicker than lightning. Lola was in her cage jumping around erratically while saying, "It hurts, it hurts, it hurts." I ran over to her and as I was about to open the cage, she stopped. Looked right at me, she was perfectly still behind you. I couldn't move. My heart sank into my stomach and I felt like throwing up. What was behind me? I didn't want to turn around, so instead I asked Lola, "What is behind me, girl?" "It's looking right at you, it is scary, be any friend." I asked another question, "Should I turn around?" Too late. Quite suddenly the lights went out. Everything was pitch dark. Lola started to sing in a very soft melody, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 squeak. I woke the next morning with a terrible migraine and a thirst I had never experienced before. Was last night just a dream? I got up and checked on Lola. She was just still. Not moving at all, not even breathing. Perched upon her favorite log. She was more beautiful than ever before. Her feathers shining like the sun. As I was observing her, she looked at me and said the last thing she ever would again, "ITSSSS till he re, I'm sorry." She collapsed directly after that. Dead. Finally silent. My little Lola. I'm so sorry. I don't know what to do and I'm afraid. Story 11, PSA, let your cat out. As a graduate student, I can't afford the time and resources to have a pet of my own right now, which is why I agreed to watch my professor's cat this week while she's away. Blue is great Abby cat, plump, playful, and a bit pathetic. I've watched her on several occasions, and have yet to grow immune to her pitiful, pleading meows. She's supposed to be on a strict diet, but I always cave in and give her extra treats. Blue meowed excitedly through the screen window as I walked up the path of my professor's house a few days ago. She watched as I collected the mail and spare key from the mailbox. I know, I cooed at her. "You're so excited to have somebody to talk to. Just give me a second, crunch." I stumbled as something cracked beneath my left foot. I gingerly stepped aside and made eye contact with a dead mouse. Sighing and tossing the mail aside, I grabbed a broom from the corner of the porch, and in 2 quick sweeps, the mouse was lost in the yard. RIP. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, almost on Blue. Hey, Blue. I said, crouching down to stroke her head. Did you catch a mouse? I asked, as she rubbed her face on my knee. She was clearly happy to have someone to socialize with. Well, maybe finish it or leave it somewhere else next time, I advised as I gave her a pat. I'd never seen Blue leave offerings before, but it's summer, so I figured she was taking advantage of all the local wildlife's seasonal scurrying. To aid in her diet, Blue uses an electronic pet feeder, which means all I'm needed for is entertainment and sanitation services. Since my professor had only left early that morning, I didn't need to check the litter box yet, so I just hung out and played with Blue for half an hour before heading out for the day. Bye, Blue, I called out as I closed the front door behind me. I'll see you again tomorrow afternoon, okay? I gave the door a little pat and left. The next day, I hopped up the front porch steps, but halted abruptly as I caught sight of the doormat, a dead squirrel, dead center in front of the cat door. Damn it, Blue, I groaned, frowning at the flies buzzing around the squirrel's face. I skirted inside the front door to avoid stepping on it, while nudging past Blue in the hallway. Wrapping my hand in 3 grocery bags, I winced as I picked up the poor squirrel like a dog turd. I rushed down the side alley of the house, holding the bag at arm's length, before slinging it into the dumpster. Feeling an urgent need to wash my hands, I sped back inside the house towards the kitchen sink. Blue, please don't make me do that again, I pleaded over my shoulder as I lathered my hands up. Still, I guess thanks for not bringing it into the house. Blue meowed politely and purred against my leg. I dried my hands off and dropped a few extra kibbles in her bowl, before heading upstairs to scoop out the litter box. I scanned the stairs and carpet as I went, anticipating a hairball or puddle of cat puke, but saw none. Both the mouse and squirrel were untouched, but Blue could have eaten something else while out in the neighborhood. All right, Blue, I called out from the front door 10 minutes later. You be good, don't bring home any leftovers. Yesterday, I stopped by the house later than usual, closer to 8 p.m. I immediately cringed at the sight of the small shape I found on the doormat, a baby rabbit. Blue ran to greet me as I entered the house, but I sternly shooed her away. I know she can't help her instincts, but I'm a sucker for small animals. Using a piece of cardboard from the recycling bin, I scooped up the meek little thing, and tossed it out with the cat litter. It deserved better. I marched back into the house and straight towards the cat door, which I promptly latched shut. Hearing the latch click, Blue ran into the hall, meowing loudly as she hurried over to investigate. Come on, Blue, I sighed, while she pined at the door. I feel bad enough for the bunny, don't make me feel worse. Despite my best efforts to distract her with treats and toys, she continued to yowl and scratch insistently at the door for another 15 minutes before I gave up. Seeing her in that distressed state, I felt guilt creeping in, but reminded myself that it was just for the night. My professor and her family would be back by 6 p.m. tomorrow, less than 24 hours away. I didn't like the idea of keeping Blue cooped up inside, but I also didn't like the idea of another bunny becoming a welcome home gift for my professor to deal with. I'm sorry, Blue, I told her, offering some consolatory treats beside her on the floor. You'll see your family tomorrow. And I'll stop by in the morning to play a little extra too, okay? My guilt amplified when I heard her meows and scratches continue as I walked away from the porch. When I returned this morning, the doormat was bare, but the door was a mess. Frantic, feral scratches were gouged into the wooden frame of the cat door. The small door itself was gone, like it had been beaten in. I tentatively unlocked the front door and called out for Blue. As the door creaked open, it scraped aside the metal hardware and shredded shrapnel of what was left of the cat door. Splinters of wood were strewn across the entryway, along with several wisps of grey cat hair. With my phone at the ready, I darted from room to room, expecting to find sure signs of a break-in, and hopefully, Blue. I cautiously combed through the house and swiftly scoured the backyard, but found nothing amiss, aside from Blue's absence. I was shaky when I returned to the front hallway. I didn't know what to do, what to even consider as a likely scenario. I called a friend, a fellow grad, and explained what I could. He came over to help me search for Blue and we speculated over the situation as we laid out cat treats around the yard. My friend thinks that Blue was leaving animals on the porch as an offering, as a pardon, for something else. She'd had time to replace the mouse and the squirrel, but after I disposed of the baby rabbit and shut her inside, she wasn't able to replace it. If that's the case, whatever came for her offering last night must have felt shorted at the sight of an empty doormat, and possibly accepted Blue instead. I've left Gibble all around the outside of the house, and am staying here until my professor returns home. I haven't contacted her yet because I'm still working on what to say and how to say it. I've left the front and back doors open, I'm undecided on what happened, I'm just trying to remain hopeful that Blue comes back home unharmed. Story 12, Strange Occurrences Around My Childhood Home. My family and I moved into our first actual house back in early 2004, and although it wasn't the lap of luxury, it was still a nice house. It was located in a cul-de-sac behind a small shopping center in a fairly large town. The family we had purchased it from had a daughter and a son, both of which we met when we were initially visiting the house. The last time I saw the daughter, who was about 17 at the time, was the day they moved out and we moved in. We didn't hear from them ever again after the sale was finalized. Fast forward to a month or two later, we started noticing some strange things around the house. It was innocent at first, things that could have easily been explained. We'd notice that the lights would be cut on after we got home, we'd hear creaks coming from the basement at night, things out of place, occurrences of that nature. Then, stuff started getting really strange. My grandparents came to visit for a few months one summer and they slept downstairs in the basement. My grandfather claimed to hear voices coming from the rest of the basement at night and initially thought it was us, but they continued late into the night. He knew we were long asleep by then. I had minor cases of insomnia every now and again, but some nights I would hear footsteps down the corridor where the bedroom doors lined. Sometimes I'd think it was my dad, but I knew they happened way too late into the night. One night of my insomnia, I had glanced over to a frame on my wall. The glass on the poster frame reflected the light from a lamppost outside my window, so I could see the reflection of my bedroom on the glass. To my horror, I saw a black mass standing between my bed and my window. It had the shape of a man, and he seemed to be staring directly at the poster frame. I froze in my bed when I saw this, unsure of what to make of it. Then, it turned around, and disappeared out of the reflection. I hid myself under my covers and couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. I wasn't sure what I saw in the reflection, but it spooked me to my core. I reiterated it to my mother, who simply dismissed it by saying it might have been my mind playing tricks on me. Then, relatives of ours came to visit that following autumn. One afternoon, they left to go to the city while my mother, my little brother, and I stayed at home. I was in my room when my mother went to take a shower and my toddler brother was playing with his toys outside the bathtub. She then heard my brother talking to someone. She audibly heard a female say hello. And my little brother repeated the greeting back. My mother thought it was our relatives that had returned, but when she exited the shower, no one was there. My brother wasn't old enough to explain who he was speaking to, but she clearly heard the voice too. That's when we realized something was actually strange about the house. We asked the neighbors if they knew anything about the house or the former owners. My parents tried to contact them, but the phone numbers they left weren't in service anymore. One of our neighbors claimed that the mother of the previous family practiced black magic and that she abused her children. A strange thing, because the family seemed so kind and friendly when we had met them. Then, that Christmas, I received an RC toy motorcycle that I frequently played with. It lasted about a month before I noticed it would move on its own. It would drive itself into a wall or stop whenever someone picked it up. I told my parents, who investigated it. They switched the motorcycle to off and the damn thing still moved on its own. Then, we removed the batteries and it stopped for about a week. Then, one night, I woke up to it driving itself into the wall, without batteries. My father threw it in the trash that morning. My mother took to research what happened to the former owners. She couldn't find anything on the husband or wife but found news about the daughter. She had committed suicide that month after they had moved out, which, she believed that maybe it was her spirit or her entity that had been communicating with my brother. The paranormal activity increased from there. Mother would see black masses in the doorway to their bedroom at night, Dad would hear whispers in the basement when he'd get up early in the morning to go to work, and my brother often ran crying to Mother because he saw a man with a black mask in the basement. They didn't hesitate. They pulled their finances together and jumped on the new home development bandwagon to get a house built several miles south. We moved out the summer of 2006 and they sold the house. The new owners often called my mother, claiming they'd see figures staring at them from inside the house through the windows and that there was the sound of a woman crying in the basement. But, the calls became less and less frequent, to the point they never called again. We joke about our past at that house now, knowing how crazy the experiences were, but most of all, we're glad we moved out. Things seemed to get worse right as we left. Story 13, Lake Jitaskog. What's the name of the place we're headed again, Dad? For the 5th time today, we're on our way to Lake Jitaskog. That's about as great as conversation was between my dad and I that summer 2 years ago. We were winding our way up the rocky and merciless roads of the Colorado mountains, on our way to spend some days camping and fishing. He had asked me 2 days ago if I had wanted to join him on a fishing trip up in the mountains. I, not being able to think of an excuse at the time, said I would go along with him. 4 hours later, we were making up what was probably the lousiest car ride I had ever been. Mr. Toad himself would have been astonished with how wild this ride was. Every bump would send my head straight to the roof of the car, where the smashing of my head against it would be imminent. Right as I felt my brain being concussed, my dad slammed on the brakes. I hadn't realized that we had arrived, as I'd been so focused on trying to protect my brain from permanent damage. My dad looked happy though. Here we are, champ. I looked out the window at the surprisingly large lake that now lay directly in front of us. We were absolutely surrounded by huge trees that almost seemed to tower over us and reach down with large and spindly branches. They nearly blotted out the sun. I walked over to the beach, while behind me I heard my dad breathe in and take in the mountain air. The sand near the water felt so coarse. It was almost as if someone put a rock up to a sanding belt, held it there for a couple seconds, and just gathered all the bits and pieces that fell off. I sat down and looked out at the water. I had to admit, it was beautiful. The water was an almost unreal shade of blue-green, and there wasn't a ripple to seen upon the surface. The water cast an almost perfect reflection upon the trees and hills that surrounded the huge oasis. It was almost hypnotic in a sense, almost like the water's gentle surface sort of put me in a trance. I was just, for some reason, so struck by the sight of the water. I snapped out of it when I heard my dad calling me back to the truck. We had to unload everything we'd brought, and it took a hell of a long time. By the time we wrapped everything up and were finished setting up camp, the sun was just dipping below the trees. After all that, I so wanted to kick back for the night, but my dad said that he wanted to throw a line out before it got totally dark. So, my dad proceeded to string up a rod for himself and cast it into the once reflective pool that was the lake. For some reason, seeing the lake's previously clear reflection destroyed by a ripple transformed it from a hypnotic mirror into a swirling and inky abyss. The lake became an unknown. It made me feel a little sick. I didn't end up fishing, I just sat by my dad and we shared a couple beers and some sandwiches we made earlier as he fished. The two of us quietly talked until the sun had completely vanished beneath the trees. Now, I was expecting it to be dark, but the darkness that came with nightfall was nowhere near the kind I expected. I'm really a huge night owl, and I love going on nighttime walks. However, the darkness was anything but welcoming or intriguing or even familiar. The darkness that night seemed inky and thick. Almost as if it would swallow you whole if you ventured even slightly out of reach. My dad and I decided it was time to turn in for the night when we saw how incredibly dark it was getting. So, we both piled into our tiny 2-man tent for the night, hit the switches on our flashlights, and tucked into our sleeping bags for the night. I'll never forget what happened that night. What I saw. What happened to my dad? Nothing in my entire life could have prepared me for what happened next. Things like this aren't supposed to happen. No, things like this don't happen. They just don't happen. But that's the thing. It did happen. And there's nothing I can do to change that. I began to doze off with my dad snoring loudly next to me when I heard it. It started soft at first, to the point where I barely noticed it, but it slowly got louder and louder. I didn't know what it was at first, but as it grew to a crescendo I began to realize what the noise was. Someone was walking around in the lake outside. I don't know where they came from or how they got there, but they seemed to come out of nowhere. But someone was out there, and they were walking out in the water. It sounded like they were taking gigantic, almost cartoonish steps as they splashed through the shallows of the lake. That wasn't the only thing, though. There was another noise that accompanied the steps. This noise was harder to make out. At first it sounded like gurgling, but, like before, as the noise grew to a crescendo I was able to make out what the noise was. I felt my whole body freeze and my heart drop as I realized what I was hearing. Someone was out there wading in the lake, and they were laughing. Not the happy laughter of someone having a good time, but deep, dark, and distorted laughter. Almost like they'd been smoking for the past 40 years, and just enjoyed a fresh pack. Think about the cheesiest possible supervillain laugh you can, and lower the pitch 8 notches. That's the laughter I heard approaching us from the lake that night. I instantly panicked, and didn't know what to do. We were supposed to be the only ones for miles out here. I sat bolt upright and started listening more intently. The splashing footsteps were approaching our area fast. I didn't really know what to do, so I silently began shaking my dad as hardly and as quietly as I could. The footsteps were right in front of our section of shore. I kept shaking him as hard as we could. Finally, he woke up and was pretty upset about why I jolted him awake. I whisper-shouted to him that someone was outside, laughing, and getting closer and closer to our tent. He looked at me like I was crazy, and suddenly I understood why. The footsteps had stopped. I turned to my dad in horror as he looked at me with disbelieving look harboring a twinge of uneasiness. I was about to ask him if we should go look outside when we both jumped. I looked at my dad to see if he was hearing what I was, and he looked shocked. Just outside our tent, we could both distinctly hear the sound of a loud, low, and gurgling breathing that seemed to fluctuate and almost change frequency with every breath. That's the only way I can really describe it. It was inhuman, and hearing it right outside our tent was probably one of the scariest things I've ever experienced. But it didn't even compare to what happened next. I hope nobody on earth has to experience the fear I felt in this next moment. Whatever was outside our tent approached the side I was on. My dad and I could see its shadow now. The thing was massive. If I had to make an estimate I'd say it was around 9 feet tall. We watched in silent terror as the shadow grew ever closer to our tent, all the while the odd and distorted breathing was growing to a horrifying crescendo. I watched the shadow stick out its arms, as it slowly raised them to seemingly reach for our tent. Its fingers were easily the size of school rulers. My breath caught in my throat as the thing began stroking the side of our tent. Not like a mindless stroking, this was a mocking, slow, and deliberate type of stroking. We heard it run its fingers all over the side of the tent I was on. They sounded sharp. I felt myself shaking and thinking back on everything that happened in my life. I thought that was going to be my final moment on planet Earth. However, my thinking back on everything was interrupted as I finally let out the scream I had been holding in the whole time. The thing slashed the side of the tent and stuck its head through the newfound entrance. I found myself screaming louder than before as I saw the face of the creature that was now peeking its way inside our tent. It had a humanoid face, but I would never in my life consider that thing anywhere near a human being. It had pale, warped skin that appeared scaly and grimy from the algae that littered the side of the lake. It had small sprouts of moss and vegetation sprouting from random splotches on its skin. Its head and skin seemed to pulsating and morphing with every horrid breath the creature took. The skin on its face seemed like it was stretched mercilessly over its skull, so much so that the thing almost looked puppet-like. The creature had no nose naught for two tiny slits that opened and closed with every breath it took. It didn't have lips, but it had a mouthful of what looked razor-sharp, extremely thin teeth that spanned the roof and bottom of its mouth. That's not the worst part though. By far and away the worst part about the creature, the part that is permanently burned in my mind, were its lack of eyes. The thing didn't have eyes. It didn't even have eye holes. In place of eyes, the creature had deformed gills that pulsed and flapped open and shut every time the creature took in air. When the gills flapped open, they exposed a disgusting array of flaps and dark green veins that were constantly twitching and morphing. Just seeing the damn thing was almost enough to make me lose consciousness. But my eye snapped out of it when my dad screamed and told me to run for the truck. The next thing I knew I was up on my feet, and sprinting towards the truck that now seemed miles away. I heard my dad next to me, but I heard the creature behind us. It began its gurgly laugh again as it began to chase after us. It was fast. Too fast. We weren't going to make it. I wasn't very athletic, and I could tell I was slowing down. I looked over at my dad. He looked terrified, and he was slowing down more than I was. I was so distracted by my dad and my fear, that I didn't realize that the creature was completely on top of us. It was inhumanly fast. We had barely made it up the beach, by the time it jumped in front of us. It stood there, repeating the same distorted laugh and breathing its disgusting and vile breath. We stood there motionless, staring seemingly into the face of death itself. It just stayed in front of us, pulsating, breathing, waiting. Then it happened. It let out one more gurgling chuckle, and the thing lunged at my dad. I stared in nothing but horror as the creature picked up my father like he was nothing but a toy. I felt my whole world fall apart as I watched the thing tear the arms off my father in one swift motion. I heard him scream in agony and terror as the creature nonchalantly tucked the dripping and writhing body of my father under its arm. It picked up his arms in its long spindly fingers, and began to march back towards the lake. I felt on my knees. I had just seen my father, the man who raised me and loved me, dismembered in front of me. I felt the breath leave my lungs as I stared at the back of the creature begin to re-enter the lake, with the body of my father still under its arm. And then he turned to me. That creature, that thing, that embodiment of nothing but evil and slaughter turned to me. It faced me. I watched it raise one of the arms of my father in its hand. I watched it curl its hand into a fist, and point my father's index finger in the air. I watched it bring that finger to its mouth, and that creature simply whispered, "SHH." It grinned at me, and then turned back to the lake and submerged itself. The last thing I saw before losing consciousness and giving way to the darkness, was the long spindly hand of the creature sticking out of the lake. The creature waved goodbye to me. Then he dipped below the murky water with my father, and I saw nothing but darkness. I lost consciousness. It was 3 days before the hikers found me stumbling down the side of the mountain, torn and bloody. I was taken to police station and identified. They kept asking me what happened to my father, but I kept telling them I didn't know. I knew that if I told them what I saw, they wouldn't believe me. Nobody would. So I kept what I saw to myself and told them the last I saw him was the lake. They dragged the whole lake looking for him. I knew they wouldn't find him. Eventually, everyone gave up. He faded into the backgrounds of everyone's minds until he was all but forgotten. He never left my mind though. Still hasn't. I miss him every day. I can't go near any kind of water these days without bawling or screaming or having a panic attack. My mother and I are in constant silence, we barely acknowledge each other. My life is falling apart. All that's ever on my mind is my dad, and that thing. That goddamn thing that stole my dad. I've been doing some research on Lake Jitaskog. Apparently a Jitaskog is a Native American creature that swells within water and devours humans. I don't believe that. That creature wasn't a predator. We weren't its prey. We were its toys. That creature was playing with us. That creature was tormenting us. That creature wanted me to watch my dad slaughtered in front of my face. It laughed at me. It shushed me. It waved goodbye to me. Things like this aren't supposed to happen. But it did. I lost my dad because of it. My life is damaged beyond repair because of it. I'm traumatized because of it. I lose sleep at night because of it. Why? Because every night as the winds from the mountains blow down across our house and our neighborhood, I swear I can still hear it up there in the hills. And it's still laughing at me. Story 14, Fake Rugs from Real People. So, I'm currently writing this on my phone in an abandoned building in Tucson, Arizona. I'm pretty sure I'm not going to live past posting this. Before I tell you exactly what's going on, I'm going to tell you a bit about me. I grew up about an hour and a half north of West Yellowstone, Montana. Nothing much there, a few ranches and my family's complex. Inherited land, it is. Was to me, now. But anyway, all the kids were homeschooled, since the nearest town was a bit of a ways away. I went off to college, got my bachelor's in conservation biology and a certificate in wildlife management. I went back home after, not entirely sure what I wanted to do with life, and then decided to do the millennial thing, take a road trip around the country. Why not, right? Do some soul searching. So I started off about a month ago, and this is where things begin to go south. I noticed this car following me as I got into Idaho, which, okay, fine, whatever. They kept following me, though. For a good 10 hours until I got to a reasonable city. Don't remember the name, doesn't matter. I check into a hotel and go to a bar, maybe pick up a girl or at least get a number. I managed to get one, off a cute blonde who had strawberry-smelling perfume on or something. It was strong but nice. We exchanged numbers. I said I'd most likely be in town for another day or so, and to hit me up. I knew she probably wouldn't, but hey, a girl can dream. So anyway, I leave the bar and go to my car. I only had 2 beers the whole time I was there and I can handle my alcohol pretty well, and the hotel was like 5 minutes away. That's when I saw it. The same damn car that was following me was parked right next to me. I decided enough was enough and took out my phone, leaning against my truck like I was texting someone. In reality, I was taking down the license plate. The smell hit me next, something I can't describe, but it made me start sneezing like a motherfucker. I suddenly remembered a lesson my mom gave me and my cousins one day, about plant-based poisons and their scents. Couldn't remember what this one was, but all the warning flags were up in my mind. So I booked it into my car and back to the hotel, being greeted by this text when I went to set an alarm for the morning. Unknown, we found you. I got 3 hours of sleep before leaving the city at dawn. Then I went to California, after driving all night through Nevada to keep them off my tail. A family friend lives in California, and I'm not going to name names or cities or anything because these people could just as easily target them. So I got there, in tears, and all but sobbed out everything. We all hit the books and the internet, none of us really knowing what we were up against. We thought we were prepared for the worst. We weren't. They called themselves belters. They drugged, tortured, and skinned people to make fake rugs of illegal animals. To elude the police or something. It's synthetic, officer, I swear. Feel it. And it technically was, even though it was made of people. The family friend's boyfriend found their website, made by sick fucks for sick fucks. There were auctions and order forms and live footage of the rug making process. God, just thinking about it makes me want to vomit. We couldn't call the cops, who would believe us? Anyone can make a fake site for pranks and reaction videos. But we knew it had to be real. I got out of California as fast as I could. I knew they were following. I had to lead them away from the friend. I thought about maybe running to Mexico, or maybe go east and up to Canada. But I never got that far. They cornered me here, in Tucson. In this building that I'm using data in to write this. To warn you guys, I can smell them coming. It hurts to hold my sneezes in. This is it. I can't run anymore. If you see anyone post about a new synthetic wolfskin rug on social media, it's made of me. I just remembered what that smell is. Wolfsbane. Story 15, he was there. I grew up in a small town about a 30-minute drive from Knoxville, Tennessee, called Newmarket. Not too much out of the ordinary ever happened in this area. For the most part, if you wanted to have a good time with your buds on a Friday night after school, you'd either drive up to Morristown or Knoxville to get absolutely trashed or go hang out at the lake if the weather permitted it. Pretty standard middle of nowhere, but between everywhere, life that you'd expect. Unfortunately for me, I developed a pretty bad reputation through middle school for being the weird kid, and it was hard to make friends up until my sophomore year of high school. But I did have one friend, we'll call him Jay. Jay and I spent time in the same groups in middle school, band, track and computer club. He had noticed that the fair chunk of people made fun of me for a lisp that I had developed, and him being the person that he was, decided that he wanted to be my friend. I'll be honest, Jay was one of the more popular kids and definitely didn't need a new weird friend, so I was a little on guard when he asked me to come over after school and play some video games, but I couldn't pass on the opportunity of having a friend. By 3:30 I had forged a bus pass with my mother's name, giving me permission to get off at Jay's house. She'd be working until late, so I would just have my brother come pick me up before she got off and we'd act like nothing really happened. My mother terrified me growing up. Not because she was abusive, but because she worked so hard that I always hated asking her for anything. It felt wrong. Anyway, I get on the bus with Jay, get off at his house and we walk in to play some MW3 on the 360, those were the days. I was nervous to meet his parents, but luckily they weren't home and would be out of town that week, so I could become accustomed to my new friend before having to meet parents. He said they were pretty chill, but looking back at it that thought makes me sick at my stomach. I ended up going over to Jay's house most days of the week. We'd work on homework, play games, chat and occasionally find a little bit of pot to smoke. This went on for years. He'd come over to my house, meet both my parents, before my dad left, and frankly, things were going great. Still never met his parents, though. It felt odd, but I was so thankful to have the first friend of my life that it didn't matter. Freshman year of high school he introduced me to his girlfriend's sister and we hit it off almost immediately. She was just as awkward if not more awkward than I. My first date, Jay was there. My first kiss, Jay was there. My first dance, Jay was there. Jay had become my very first best friend. He was the first person to treat me as anything more than that weird kid. Then came sophomore year of high school. I didn't know why at the time and he surely didn't want to talk about it, but he and Elise, my girlfriend's sister, broke up abruptly and his grades started to plummet just as I was becoming, well, popular. We still hung out and hit the town together, but Jay was a whole lot more reserved, quiet and all around different. Looking back at it, I didn't go back to his house for the rest of high school. I did what any normal kid would do. Shit, did I just refer to myself as normal? That's a meme, and asked my mom about why the friendship wasn't as strong, and in the old sage way she said people grow apart. I took that answer for a while, though it didn't really make sense to me. We didn't have a reason to grow apart, it was sudden. Jay changed in a matter of days. Almost 10 years later, I'm married, a kid on the way and I work a pretty decent job. Jay and I had stayed in touch when he left for college on the other side of the country. He got graduated, got married, though that fell apart when his wife had a miscarriage and killed herself, and eventually moved back home. I live about an hour away from Newmarket now. Yesterday, I got a call from Jay asking me if I would come over and have a beer or so and I was ecstatic. I couldn't wait to see my best friend after all this time. I told my wife bye, hopped in the car and started the hour drive home. Once I go there it was pretty routine. We spent about an hour catching up, drinking beers and throwing some darts. He seemed fine. I ended up headed home at about 1 a.m. that night. The cops say that he put a gun in his mouth about 30 minutes after I left. I just got the news this morning, but I knew something was off when I found the following note in my jacket pocket. Mike. Man, we had a hell of a time growing up, didn't we? I just want you to know that you're the best friend that I could have ever had. So I wanted to admit these things to you before I end it all tonight. The reason you never met my parents. They used to beat the hell out of me, and by the time we started hanging out they both pulled a stint in prison for that very thing. Grandma paid the bills and kept the lights on, so I had a place to crash and reliable car while they were gone. I thought about leaving for all those years, but they always told me that they'd kill me if I left. So I stayed. When they came back around sophomore year, I was broken. The beatings, the constant terror and pure fear I felt for my own life destroyed me. Michelle's miscarriage and the end of my marriage left me, well, one thing that needed to be done. I came home and murdered my parents in their retirement home last night. I wanted to see you before I ate this tasty looking .45. I love you, man. I should have been there for him. Story 16, he won't leave. Alright, I don't really know where the hell to begin. This whole thing, it happened so fast. I've never experienced anything like this before in my entire life, and I'd bet nobody else has either. Maybe you guys can help me out because I think I'm going fucking crazy. Right now, I'm sitting at some shitty table in the mental health ward of my local hospital, trying to piece this story together from the beginning. I guess I'll start from when I think everything started happening, about a week ago. Just some background information. I'm a 16-year-old high school student, male, who lives in a small town in Illinois. I have a nice family. I'm an only child with a loving mother and father. I go to school every day, come home and play video games, surf the web, go to sleep and repeat. Pretty mind-numbing, but I honestly don't mind it. Anyways, I'm getting off topic. This all started about a week ago in my bedroom at about 4 o'clock in the morning. For no reason at all, I woke up. Now, I never get up this early, and usually when I'm able to I'll sleep into noon. But something jolted me from my sleep that night. I sat up in my bed and rubbed my eyes, looking around my room. Something instantly felt off, which is why I was scanning my room in the first place. Then I found it. Sitting in my desk chair with its back turned to me was the outline of a person, just sitting there. I stared at it for a while, but it didn't move. Even when my eyes adjusted to the dark, I was unable to make out what it was. A simple shadow of nothing, I told myself. It was probably a pile of clothes that was stacked oddly. So, with my new reassurance in mind, I laid back down and went back to sleep. Within seconds I was back to sleep like a baby and woke up soundly the next morning. The matter seemed so small to me at the time that I had completely forgotten about my late-night incident when I woke up at around 7 in the morning. I didn't even notice that there was absolutely nothing stacked on my chair, nothing that could have made that shape. I slipped out of my pajamas and into some clothes, brushed my teeth and went downstairs for some breakfast before I headed out to school. My mom and dad were in the kitchen, eating cereal and chatting with each other. I wasn't a morning person, so I didn't talk much. We exchanged our good mornings, and that was that before heading out the door. Nothing happened the rest of the school day, at least, nothing worth mentioning. I went to my classes and hung out with my friends, then walked back home like any other ordinary day. When I got home I immediately rushed up the stairs and towards my room as was my daily ritual. Something stopped me at my door frame, however, because sitting in my office chair with their back turned to me, was a boy around my age. My stomach sank as I was reminded of last night, all in one crashing sensation. Obviously, since it wasn't dark out, I got a better look at the kid. To me he just looked like an ordinary teenage boy. Looking back on it now, my dumbass hadn't even realized that he was wearing the exact same clothes I was wearing that day. What are you doing?" I asked in a tone I tried to make sound stern, but my voice shook. There was absolute silence. After a few more awkward seconds, the boy stood up slowly and faced me. Then he just walked right past me, down the stairs and out the front door. This fucker just walked right out of my house without acknowledging me or telling me what he was doing in the first place. I know I should have followed him and attempted to get answers, but I was too stunned. I simply stood there for a few minutes before confronting my parents about it at dinner. I asked if they had invited a kid over without telling me. I know, a ridiculous question. Nobody would ever do that, but that was the only logical answer I could come up with. My parents had no idea who I was talking about and seemed to be just as unnerved as I was. Thankfully they believed me, and my dad and I ensured we had all the doors locked before going to bed that night. However, later that night I was rudely pulled from my sleep once again. This time there was a reason for it. I heard someone's voice. I sat up in my bed and listened for the voice again. A few seconds passed, and I heard it again. It was very close and coming from the wall to my left. I turned my head and saw a figure of a person standing next to my bedside. I almost had a fucking heart attacking as the figure just stood beside me and talked. The problem was that they were saying words, but they weren't making any sense. They were English words and I understood the individual words, but the sentences weren't making any sense. He spoke with such a soft voice, not whispering but not talking normally. I don't remember everything this creepy fuck said, but here are some of the sentences I remember. Wash it, the yard it's cold, yes old friend. No, no. Don't thank him, he's turning it inside out. Please, please don't enter the home. Like any normal person in this situation, I lost my shit. I practically leapt backwards out of my bed and fumbled for the lamp. When I pulled the switch and flooded the room with light, it was gone. There was no trace of anyone ever being here. My head felt like it was spinning, and I rushed downstairs to wake my parents up. I managed to tell them everything that had happened in my semi-panic attack state. They believed me once again, and my dad went upstairs to find out if there was anything still lurking up there. He came down about 10 minutes later with nothing. My mom suggested we call the cops, but my dad, being a cop, told her there was no point since whoever was here had clearly left. So all three of us stayed awake the rest of the night and made sure whoever was in my room didn't return. It didn't return, at least not for a while. About a week passed since that incident. Although my parents believed my story, I was beginning to doubt myself. If it were a real person, how did they vanish as soon as I turned on the light? It just didn't make any sense. I tried forgetting all about it and began sleeping in my room again. I was half expecting to be woken once again by that thing when I returned to sleeping in my room, but to my surprise I woke soundly the next morning to my alarm clock. I breathed a sigh of relief and did my daily morning routine before heading downstairs for breakfast. When I made it downstairs and entered the kitchen, I almost threw up. My parents were sitting in their usual spots with their cereal, talking to each other. Sitting in my spot, was that thing. That fucking kid. It was eating cereal like my parents, but they weren't acknowledging it. Even though it was doing nothing out of the ordinary, it seemed so out of place. What the fuck? I shouted, jolting my parents' attention over to me. What? My mother asked in a panic. It's there, it's right fucking there. I shouted, pointing at it. What is? You don't see it? He's right there. They couldn't see it. The boy just sat there, refusing even to acknowledge me shouting at it. It just sat there and ate cereal like it was lost in time. My parents looked genuinely scared, but it wasn't for the reason I was scared. So now fast forward one day later and here I am. In the mental health ward in my local hospital, writing everything down on my phone. I snuck in here. My doctor says writing things down might help me. They all think I'm crazy, saying there was an imbalance in my brain that caused me to hallucinate. They think I had a mental breakdown of some sort. The thing is, I started to believe them. That was the only explanation to it. It's not possible for a person to disappear in a split second. It's not possible for you to see something someone else can't. All these happenings don't make any sense. I thought the doctors must be right. I had gone crazy for some unexplained reason. There was literally no other possible explanation. Here's the problem though, my parents came to visit me this morning, and sitting right next to them, right fucking beside them in my hospital room, was him. He was wearing my clothes, he had my hairstyle, and hell, he was even sitting with my posture. Nobody sees him, but he's fucking real. I don't know what to do. Am I insane? Story 17, Wilt. The gifts began when the girl was 5 years old. Her name, Ayana. The meaning of the name transcribed from the Native American as delicate flower. She was a child and her family would lavish gifts upon her. All of the other children in the family envied her. She was brought up in occult-like circumstances. headed by her uncle. The uncle would give speeches at dinner time and at meals, stating about the omnipresent nature of Ayana's fate. That one day she would be brought into an entirely new state of being, as of yet not witnessed by human beings. He told the others who held table with him at meals about his esoteric journeys to the other side of the world. How he had met and conversed with gurus from India, how he had unraveled the secrets of those initiated into the Taoist order, how he had shared his travels with Buddhist monks. His travels throughout the world had earned him all sorts of worldly experience. But he had returned home, and because he had returned home, he was lacking any suitable adventure. It was unclear exactly as to the reasoning of Ayana's uncle's actions. Perhaps he was creating some preliminary adventure for his niece, or perhaps his actions possessed some form of sinister motifs as of yet unseen. On some days, the family, though possessed by poverty, would take a bedsheet out of the family home. Separate members of the family would hold the bedsheet at different corners to spread it out, and formed a primitive version of a trampoline. They would bounce the 5-year-old Ayana up and down upon it, chanting her name as they did so. There were different practices that the family would partake in, such as the circle of positivity. The ritual involved placing Ayana at the center of a group of people who sat around her in a circle-shaped formation. They were then instructed to focus all of the positive thoughts that they could muster in upon the child. It was an odd occurrence, and what would eventuate from the process is sporadic fits of glee and giggling from the child. So much positivity being focused in upon the child would create a special shine to the energy that encompassed her. Apart from the odd rituals that the family, or cult, held, Ayana spent most of her time running outside, partaking in the feast of seasonal fruits that grew in the local habitat. She would run outside, playfully, with the sun shining down on her the way it did. It seemed as if the gods themselves had blessed her to run wild and free for the rest of her life. Ayana grew to an age of 15 and was soon becoming a young woman. On the eve of her 16th birthday, a wealthy man came to town. Tall, dark and handsome, he possessed the natural grace of a cat. The way he would move is as if he were silently stalking prey. He had some form of long-known connection to Ayana's uncle, and when her uncle instructed the 16-year-old Ayana to fulfill whatever desire the man had, Ayana willingly obliged. On the eve of her 16th birthday, Ayana entered a bedroom with the tall, dark man. She entered that room a virgin in her innocence and womanhood. The next day she would exit, neither a virgin, nor innocent. After that day, the 16-year-old Ayana was no longer treated as special. The rituals had focused in upon a new girl, one of Ayana's cousins. Ayana would wake with morning sickness only to discover that she was pregnant. Another boy, the same age as Ayana, who had grown into his teens. He had witnessed everything that had happened to the young woman. He had witnessed it all, seen it all, and he was sickened. He had become aware of the cult-like scenario in which he and she were raised. And when he witnessed the tall, dark man handing over a briefcase full of money to Ayana's uncle the day after their romantic interlude, the young man became sick and dizzy. Nauseous was the word. For what he had witnessed revealed the true nature of their lives. The day after the event, he spent the next evening sitting in amongst the grass that had faded away, yellow and dry, picking up each of the pieces, each blade of grass, and seeing its lifeless form. The world spun around the young man as he attempted to try and regain some semblance of passivity, attempting to struggle against the anger that captured and enclosed in upon his soul. The ambivalent feelings twisted and tormented him until he retched, vomiting a pasty-like liquid that was reminiscent of his morning's breakfast of porridge and orange juice. The young man, Paolo was his name, contented himself to escape from the cult and take Ayana with him. He did so slowly. First he introduced himself to Ayana and helped take care of her as she was sick with child. He eased her pains, bringing her the food and fruits that she craved from the local harvest, feeding her whatever she desired. Together they contemplated the way in which they were raised. With these realizations, Ayana was not only vomiting because of morning sickness, but also because of the realization of her surroundings. Ever since she was a child, she had been prepared for this moment. being brought up with riches lavished upon her so that she would sacrifice her own life and well-being for the well-being of her child. There was an issue of contention. Perhaps if someone had explained all of these things, had told her she was being treated like a miniature goddess in her childhood for the sacrifice of motherhood in her later adult life, then maybe she would be content in her current position. But for all of the gifts of generosity that had been given to her, wisdom and knowledge were not part of them. The point at which they sought assistance to abort the child was when Paolo had admitted that he had seen the exchange between the man who had taken Ayana's virginity and her uncle. The exchange of a briefcase full of cash. It was at this point that they ventured outside of the village and sought the assistance of others. Others who belonged outside of the cult. When they both explained the situation to an elderly woman who had a kind heart. The elderly woman took pity on the two. Even if they were teenagers, she saw them both still as children. She produced a special tea that would induce a miscarriage. Ayana drank the tea and returned to the family home. That night as Ayana's womb bled out onto her sheets in the throes of a miscarriage, her uncle came to her room and confronted the two lovers. He had been secretly observing the two, and when he heard Ayana's cries of pain coming from her room, he went to them and began screaming at them, "You two little shits. I have given you everything anyone could ever ask for, and this is how you repay me. How dare you commit such an act? How dare you? I'll see you both dead for this act." Paolo, who listened to the outburst in silent rage, grabbed a tomahawk that he had secretly concealed for this very occasion. He produced it from its hiding place and with a heavy blow, struck Ayana's uncle on the side of his head, causing a severe blow to his skull that broke through the bone, splitting his skull with consistent strokes of the tomahawk, powered by the muscles that he had been given through laborious duties. Paolo concealed the man's body in the sheets that were stained with Ayana's blood through her miscarriage, wrapping up and concealing his features so that they did not have to bear further witness to the split skull. Then they both rode off and into the night, never to look back on their conflicted childhoods. But always haunted by the secrets of men in their evil pursuits of power over others. Story 18, A Bride's Tears. It was 1 a.m., I had just gotten off work and was heading home. I usually take a taxi straight to my apartment, but it was a Friday and the traffic was unbearable. So instead I just took the train and decided to walk the rest of the way back. The train station isn't too far anyway. It's probably just a 20-minute walk away through the bars and alleyways. Now, I walked my usual route, and as I turned one of the corners I saw this woman, dressed in white, stumbling around. I kept my distance and trotted along without touching or making eye contact with her, since I assumed she was drunk. Then as I passed her I felt a slight chill hit the back of my neck. I turned around and she was gone. I pinched my arm and chuckled to myself, shrugging it off as nothing but my mind playing tricks on me. After all, I had been working from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. and it was already 1 in the morning. I looked forward once again and walked on in a much faster pace. I entered my building and walked up the stairs. My apartment didn't have an elevator, since it was only 4 stories high. I climbed up to the 3rd floor and entered my room. I unloaded my things and discarded my coat quickly. I couldn't wait to get to bed. I was at the point where closing my eyes for at least 2 seconds would be enough to send me into a deep sleep. I opened the door leading to the bedroom and nearly had a heart attack as I saw the woman I passed a while ago sitting on my bed. I rubbed my eyes and opened the light to see if she was real. She was bent over with her face buried in her 2 hands. I think she was crying. I stepped back as she looked up at me and asked if I would kindly stay for a while. I told her I was fine just staying by the door as she buried her face into her hands once again. This was my moment, I told myself, as I bolted out of my room and into the streets. I took a moment to catch my breath as I started casually walking away. I made my way to a nearby Starbucks and spent the whole night there, unable to think or sleep. When the clock hit 7 I decided to return to my apartment. I was greeted by my landlord, who asked me why I had left. I ran out of my room and left the door open. I told him he wouldn't believe me if I told him, which he surprisingly responded to by saying, "Was it the woman again?" My eyes widened as I asked him, "How did you know?" He went on to tell me the story of a woman who used to live in that room with her husband until one day she found out her husband cheated on her. He said that they got into a fight and her husband left her. Not long after their fight she went missing as well and she was never found. I asked him if it was okay that I move and he just nodded and said I understand. He helped me pack and didn't even charge me for the month. Now I stay with my co-worker, Daryl, and his family. Story 19, Our Oddest Story. So what I am going to tell you is real. It really happened to me and my friends. We still don't know what to make of this or even what really happened. I have to start off with that even when I tell people in real life, which doesn't happen very often, because it sounds too much like a story some kids made up. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm from a suburb in St. Louis, Missouri. It tends to be quiet when it comes to bad things happening. I mean, we do have murders, robberies, and other crimes since we are in a metro area, but we don't really have that many odd things happen. This night my friends and I were at our friend's birthday party. We'll call him Josh for the sake of not actually giving out his name. Josh's parents live walking distance to one of the local elementary schools. We decided to go and play on the elementary school's playground. Most of the guys for the party had already came. I was the only girl, but I knew most of them besides one guy. Everyone else knew him though, so he was chill. There were I think 7 of us in total, so it wasn't too big of a group. We headed up the hill and across a grass field to the school. The sun was setting when we got there. So we played a little on the swing set and just hung out. We were still waiting for one of our friends to come meet us. I don't really remember most of what we did cause it was pretty average for high schoolers. On the other side of the playground was a smaller field. It was shaped like triangle with a road on one side and woods on the 2 others. These woods backed up onto houses and backyards. In the corner where the 2 woods met was an outdoor classroom. Basically a podium and some benches where teachers could bring their classes to enjoy what little good weather we had in the school year. We all ran over there and decided to tell scary stories since it was getting dark. After a few arguments about who was going first, one of my friends, we'll call him Jim, and the guy I didn't know, Roy, started to tell a story of when they were in Boy Scouts. I can't really remember much of it because just after they started there was some rustling in the trees to our backs. We turned around but didn't go and search too closely. It was the woods after all and it stopped and we were in a quiet neighborhood so we weren't too worried. I remember us deciding it was a bat or something. We went back to the story, which I still can't remember. After a few more sentences from Jim and Roy, everyone got up and looked back at the woods. The rustling happened again, which was not the biggest call for alarm since we like to think of ourselves as logical people. However, this time there was a noise that came along with it. It sounded like a baby crying. Everything after that happened really fast. One of the guys yelled "Run!" We all took off sprinting back to the playground which had a light pole. When we got back we were regrouping. What was that? What happened? We hung out on the playground a little bit longer. One of us got a text from our late friend saying he was at Josh's house. So most of us were going to head back and meet up with him. Except Roy wanted to spend a bit more time swinging on the playground, so Jim said he would stay with him and walk back with him. Since it was dark and we didn't want him getting lost or hurt alone, the main group of us made it to the larger field after walking over the blacktop, which is what we call asphalt. We all had our phones' flashlights on since we didn't want to trip and fall in a gopher hole or something. We made it maybe a few yards in when someone said something. When I turned around we saw a helicopter over the smaller field. It had its searchlight on. Some said to turn off my flashlight. It felt like a movie. I was just confused. What was it doing here? Did it have something to do with that baby-like cry? Was there an escaped convict? Which is what most suburban kids go to since we aren't versed in many bad things. I heard someone yell "Run!" and we took off for Josh's house. When we got there, our friend Max was sitting, bored, in the basement, looking perplexed at us as we came barreling in the door for the patio. Some of us were out of breath. We tried explaining it to him. We pulled out our phones and checked the news. Nothing. Josh went up to his parents and asked if they heard anything. Nothing. I even after the party went home and check a few days later. Nothing. Sometimes I think about it. It is the strangest thing that has ever happened to us. I was back home a few weeks ago catching up with Josh and one of the other guys there that night. We were talking about what we remember. Josh doesn't remember the baby cry. We all have different memories with what actually happened when the helicopter showed up. Either with the searchlight on or off, it even had one act. It's been 3 or 4 years since it happened. We don't know why that helicopter was there or what sound we actually heard was. It is still the strangest and most interesting thing that has ever happened to me. I don't know who to turn to about this cause no one would believe it. I told my mother when it happened. She's just as confused. So to this day we have no answers to this very odd story. Story 20, The Floating Man. Shrapnel flew past his heavy visor. His movements were still, stiff, and heavy. He was still in his spacesuit. The tether had snapped. Something had slammed through it at 10 kilometers per second, ripped through it like a hot knife through butter. Now he was drifting. As he was tugged towards a vast black sphere of empty space, there were no stars there, no light, only unfair death. He turned around. His movements were stiff and slow, but he saw it. Like a beautiful, white bird. His ship, it was moving. Moving away. Fleeing. He wanted to cry out, scream, wait. But when he pushed the button to trigger his comm system, he heard static. Oh, God. It was weak. Pathetic. A whimper at best. It was all he could stand as tears sprung to his eyes, as he saw it. That monstrous black void. Then he felt it, the vibrations through the interstellar medium that signaled the ship had left him for dead. He was alone. He felt small. He couldn't see anything else. His family. He could just imagine the funeral. No body. The tears, his daughters crying over a man who they would never see again. Elizabeth, his loving wife of 5 years pretending to be strong for their sake, but breaking inside. He had to at least try to get away, and come home like he promised. For them. Using his pack he tried to thrust himself away from the looming sense of death and inevitable destruction. To a thing which dealt in light years, in eons, it didn't matter, that dark hole, that empty place in space. He couldn't get out of its grasp. He was trapped. He was falling. It was a familiar sensation, the tug of gravity. His visor fogged up, then returned to normal. Fear was sending waves of heat and cold through his body. His stomach tied itself into knots. He wanted to throw up, but he couldn't. He calmed himself, and tried to broadcast something, anything to let someone know what happened, and so he spoke up, perhaps for the last time ever. His only eulogy, his last words, "My name is John Parker Herman, my pack is running low on fuel, and I am going to die." The man was drifting closer to that seamless shadow. Almost like a two-dimensional moor where space, the stars, and galaxies just fell into it like some old well. He could still move, but he couldn't get away. He was drifting. Downwards, at a rate where he could barely tell he was moving. It wasn't slow, but with nothing all around him, he could only judge his speed by the tugging sensation in his stomach as it was being pulled downwards at an ever-increasing rate. It was terrifying. This endless void of dark so intense it actually hurt his eyes. His body couldn't make sense of it. It made no sound, made no motion, yet still, it reached for him. An invisible hand of such limitless strength and greed, that he was unsure of whether or not he could actually maintain his grip on his sanity. Then, after what felt like half a lifetime, suspended in this useless medial cold between the stars, he felt the heat. Not the type of pleasant heat that one would expect from the sun or a flame, but the intense white-hot flash of pain. His legs, in particular, felt like they were being stretched upon a medieval rack. He had felt many pains in his life, but none were quite so immediate and quite so terrifying. He screamed briefly, but his terror did not reach the mute darkness outside his helmet. His eyes darted back and forth, but he saw no one. No one but him, and the dark space he was inexorably drawn towards. At that moment he realized exactly what such a terrible thing pain was. The constant sense of horrible stretching and tearing. The feeling of being pulled apart at your seams. He felt blood vessels pop, the blood rushing from his head to his feet, and he started to panic. Someone, anyone, are you there? My name is John Parker Herman. I have a wife, Elizabeth, and 2 beautiful children. Tell them that Daddy isn't coming home. That was the last word he never got to say. Never would say. Now taken into the dark, he managed to turn, and saw, as if in slow motion, the stars screaming, whirling, and dancing across all of time at once. The stars themselves were growing upon the vast and unfair tapestries of life, in their own celestial destinies. They grew in massive flashes, then went dim. All ballooned, flashed, and faded. Then, there came the last. It was dark. The last thing he saw was nothing.